This guy was about to become a senior mage and ready to propose to the love of his life, already thinking about the happy days and nights they would have together. But destiny was brutal. His unique and unseen magical discoveries were stolen by his superior, and that made him lose his promotion. Nobles used this moment to get his fiancée, and she was sold to a high-ranking noble as a plaything for night entertainment. Fueled only by rage and pain, he decided to attack them, but since his focus was researches, he was defeated and thrown into prison. There he discovered that after some days with the nobles, his beloved decided to end her own life. Now desolated and deep into sorrow, he decided to go all in with the forbidden dark magic. With the prohibited power, he slaughtered the guards and escaped the prison, invaded the castle of those who ruined his life and made them beg for mercy. The nobles offered riches, his title, any new woman he wanted, but that guy that had lost everything didn't want anything other than revenge. He killed them without hesitation and moved a golem army to declare war on the unfair and corrupt noble system. But the world had its hero, the boy blessed by the goddess. He was labeled as the Demon King, monsters, accused of being the incarnation of all evil, and then he clashed with the chosen hero's army in a long war. In the end, only the hero stood. The mage was unable to overcome the divine power, but he cast one final dark curse before being beheaded, putting a stain in the hero and all his descendants. And now, hundreds of years later, the curse still lingers. The so-called hero's bloodline teeters on the brink of vanishing, and the so-called Demon King has just been reborn, reincarnated into the very family he once cursed. But his curse was so effective that the family is about to go bankrupt and lose everything. The problem is that now he needs power again to completely destroy every single noble. The moment he woke up screaming, Hans the butler entered the room. They had a small talk where the boy step by step began to find out where he was and who he was. He couldn't believe that the simple curse he cast 500 years ago really had completely destroyed that guy's lineage, and that even he now was being affected by it. After reading some books, he understood everything and could only think that he's the one at fault for losing. But for some reason, he feels the curse itself has something to do with him being born in this family. But he now had the chance to reorganize his army to fully vanish the corrupt nobles. But suddenly he heard someone shouting outside. His butlers were all scared and tense, and there stood a 4'1" ugly merchant called Darren, saying he wants an audience with the young master right now. He had to pay his debts. RMC laughed, saying the curse was really good since the dude even is on debt. Even worse, 30,000 pesos, the money he got to develop a mine but never paid. Hans tried to explain that the master had to rest due to his condition, but the merchant refuses to hear any of it, saying they need to hear about this matter from the young master himself. At that moment, everyone falls silent. Then the man says that judging by their reactions, it seems they won't be able to pay it back right now. 30,000 pesos is no small amount, and because of that, he's going to make an offer. The only thing they have to do is hand over the giant in their house, which probably isn't even worth 30,000 since it's second-hand. That's why he says he's making a great offer. And at that very moment, the other soldier says that's impossible. They only have 3 giants in the entire house, so they wouldn't be able to defend the territory without one of them. Everyone keeps going with that annoying argument there, and the protagonist, watching everything from above, was just laughing, saying that idiot Liken should have seen this. Next, the merchant asks them to calm down, mentioning that personally he wants to take the giant and the entire mansion, but he doesn't want people to think they were the ones who took the great hero's house. And for that reason, he says he wants what he's pointing at. The furious soldier says he already told him he doesn't want the giant. But the merchant wasn't referring to that, but rather to the magic tower behind him. Everyone starts thinking about the proposal, since it's a better choice than the giant, as no one goes to that place anymore. That thing is practically useless now, and right then the protagonist, looking at it, already more or less knew what was going on. After all, that is his magic tower. 500 years ago, his house was far from where the Demon King's tower was located, and it was where he used to live with Katarina. The house was old and completely run down, but even so, it was still his home. And back in the present, our boy was furious about that situation, and the merchant really seemed very interested in that tower. They were almost reaching an agreement, and at that very moment, the protagonist appears there. Man, the kid really doesn't look too good. The merchant asks if he has recovered already and says that the talks with his vassals seem to be going well. Now they only need a signature to confirm that his company will oversee the management of the Demon Tower. But my guy, the furious kid, asks if talking is the only thing they know how to do. They don't even know what kind of place this is, asking how he dares try to take control of it. No one understood why the boy was so furious, and Saman says that after taking the land in the center of their territory, they intend to expand their influence and authority under the guise of developing the area, allowing people to enter freely in the name of tourism, asking if he thinks he misunderstood. Honestly, he hates that type of person, and hearing all that, of course the merchant was already running out of options, thinking that at times like this, he needed to give an even more confident response, saying that House Lakin cannot pay its debt, and that's why they were trying to be considerate with him and came up with this proposal. His company has to recover the money somehow. And Saman says that at no point did he say they wouldn't pay the debt, declaring that in 10 days he will repay everything, including the interest, telling him to get out of his sight now. Man, the kid is really pissed. With that, having no other choice, everyone leaves, and the merchant says he'll see whether he can back up his words. With everything settled, one of the soldiers at the side says he can't believe what he told the merchant, saying that the vassals are truly surprised by his declaration. Seeing him get angry to protect his ancestors' achievements and honor was simply incredible. But Samuel wants to know what he's talking about, and the guy says he didn't know he took such pride in the family's honor. But my guy, of course that has nothing to do with it. Right. Then Hans asks if he may know how he intends to pay the debts. After all, that amount of money is basically enough to buy another giant. Right now, they don't have enough collateral to borrow money, asking if he has any other solutions. However, the kid doesn't want to hear any of it, and as he starts to walk away, he says he'll pay the debt his own way, and they should just stand there and watch. And so time passes, and Simon was getting to know everything about that place. But of course, he wasn't satisfied with any of it, asking if this isn't the family that killed the Demon King, and why there is absolutely nothing there, asking if they stole everything, though of course they wouldn't do that, right? He'll understand if he looks at the family tree, because after the hero Lacan killed the Demon King, he was granted the title of Marquis over a vast territory in the south of the Kingdom of Livia. At that time, Duke Baroque incited a rebellion against the Kingdom of Livia, and Viscount Lacan fought against him because he could not tolerate the injustice being committed. However, since the young man was under the Demon King's curse, he suffered a completely crushing defeat. And after that, his title was revoked and he was exiled to the frontier, dying soon after because of his age. Looking at the situation, Simon immediately thinks that it seems it was never Lacan's intention to establish his territory there, saying that this family's financial situation is so desperate that it's a miracle. It managed to last 500 years. Honestly, he wanted to know how they ended up like this. And Haxton says it's because his ancestors hoped to restore their former glory. And to make a comeback, his ancestors would do anything. Even if it meant using all the wealth and authority they had, they wanted to restore this family's reputation. However, because of the curse passed down through its members, no matter how hard they worked, their efforts were in vain, and that was how one day the home of the hero who saved the world met its ruin. To be honest, he doesn't know if he remembers that. But the reason he lost consciousness for more than half a month because of the giant incident was because he was working to restore the family's reputation. He wanted to prove he had the qualities of a hero, and pushed himself even harder. And hearing that, our boy just gets up from the chair, saying that in the current situation there isn't much they can do. The old man apologizes for everything, but surely there must be something they can do, and even if he has to give up his life, he'll find a way to gather the full amount to pay it back. However, Simon says there's no need for all that since he just thought of something. After all, they just need to pay the money back somehow, right? And man, of course, nothing good is going to come from this. And after a while, all the vassals were shocked. The brat had literally taken the statue of the hero Lacan. Hans was already losing his mind, thinking the statue had been there until yesterday, and asking where it could have gone. But that's not the most important thing right now, because he needs to find the Lord first. And at that very moment, a soldier appears saying there's a problem, because the Lord had left while security was vulnerable. Right away, Hans realizes what was going on, wondering what the Lord was planning to do. Meanwhile, the brat was hauling that statue on a cart. The carriage driver wanted to ask a question. Simon asks who he is, and the guy is surprised that he forgot. After all, his name is Phillips, and he serves him as his guardian knight, asking if he really intends to sell that statue. And the boy says yes, because it should bring in good money if they melt it down. The guy tries to say it was a very important statue, but of course Simon doesn't want to hear any of it, asking if those 5 centuries of history are going to feed him. The guy says he won't be able to pay off his debts just by selling that statue. However, Simon says that's only a small part of his plan. After all, he's going to use the money from the statue to gamble and win the 30,000. Wow, what an idiot. Hearing that, of course, the soldier is shocked, right? Asking what will happen if he ends up losing all the money. If he had known that was the plan, honestly, he wouldn't have gone with him. So they should go back now and beg forgiveness for everything that happened. But man, there's no turning back now. And Simon says that if he went back now, he'd have to explain why he left with the statue of the great predecessor. And if his reason was that he needed money to gamble, they definitely would never forgive him. Besides, he's sure he'd be permanently kicked out of the family if he went back now, right? They definitely wouldn't do anything to him since he's the lord of that place. But on the other hand, he'd be the only one cast out. Right then, man, of course the brat had already realized what had happened. And there's no other choice but to keep going, right? Simon tells him to think about what's best for him because he could end up becoming a penniless bum or even become a hero who would bring honor to that blessed house. Telling the poor guy to choose already, with no other choice, they'll have to keep going, and the soldier thinks he heard that his personality changed after he woke up from the coma. But this guy is basically the devil himself. And a little later, the two were near a boat, and after getting on it, finally they head toward their destination. Sometime later, in a port city, finally they manage to sell the damn statue. Looking around, Simon says this place has certainly changed, and the boy asks if he's been there before. He says only a little, although it wasn't like this before. After all, back then it wasn't a place they could easily access because of a monster, and it was basically a deserted island. Anyway, 500 years have already passed, and it was definitely a good idea to go there. And so, time passes, and the two walk through the city, getting to know everything around them. And man, it's finally time to gamble. I can already tell nothing good is going to come of this. Simon, without wasting any time, already wanted to go into the establishment, but the boy asks him to wait. He needs to get a little air first, asking if he knows any way to win every game. And the brat confidently says that when it comes to gambling, your attitude is what matters most. But a few minutes later, the brat gambling had basically lost everything, and the guy on the other side of the table asks if he's going to continue. Apparently, he doesn't have any money left, so they should stop there, right? However, the protagonist had already made up his mind, ordering Phillips to bet the rest of the money. The guy gets nervous, but there was no other choice but to do it, right? And Simon, full of confidence, tells him to bet everything all at once. Phillips thinks the family was definitely doomed. And the guy on the other side of the table says he must be really nervous about their game. And Simon says that being anxious doesn't change the outcome. At that, the guy says that if that's the case, they should reveal their cards already. And completely confident in his hand, he already thinks he's won. But Simon asks him to wait, finally showing his hand. The man is shocked that he lost, and the protagonist, as casually as ever, says it was a good match. But my friend, the guy was not happy with the loss, saying that he probably used some kind of trick. And Simon says he knows very well that the people behind him are telling him all of his cards. Obviously, there was no way he wouldn't know that because all the nearby spectators are his subordinates. But the reason he kept falling for that trick was because he needed to touch literally every single card. Of course, he left a little mana in them, and that way he could control them with his marks. That's how he won. And then Simon tells him to admit his defeat already. But the opposite happened. And man, the guy sent a whole bunch of people after the kid, who says these idiots are still the same, even after 500 years. He doesn't have the same amount of mana as before now. But that's not a problem when facing them. At that very moment, a bunch of mercenaries charge at the protagonist, and Phillips, without wasting any time, draws his sword, asking how they dare turn against the sole heir of the Lacan family, which means he's probably prepared to risk his life. Right then, the guy wets his pants, saying he had made a grave mistake. But of course, it was already too late to apologize, right? Meanwhile, our boy was watching everything from afar, and a little later, they leave the place as casually as can be with a whole lot of money. And looking back, Simon thinks he thought that boy was only useful as a porter, but he's more talented than he expected. Anyway, the money they won today wasn't bad, but it'll be hard to use gambling houses after causing all that chaos. And changing the subject, he asks if there's any other place to make money besides betting houses. Philip says there's the Arena of Giants, because just like in the past, giants now fight each other in arenas. Depending on the fight, the amount of money earned can vary, but if he does well, he could make a fairly considerable amount. Simon becomes deep in thought, and the boy says to just trust him, because he used to be one of the best students at the Imperial Military Academy of Giants. So our hero agrees to go take a look at that place. But at that very moment, the two start hearing a noise from the other side of the street. Two soldiers were confronting a child, and Simon, watching the situation, thinks that although the world has changed, there are still things that never do. Some things decay and rot even more with time. But of course, he's not going to let that happen so easily, right? And just as he was about to confront the soldiers at that very moment, someone else appears. The girl asks if they aren't the royal guard and whether they shouldn't be protecting the citizens, but instead they were doing the opposite, using violence against children. And looking at that girl, the protagonist is immediately surprised. After all, that woman looks extremely similar to his wife. Next, the soldier says that even if she were the princess, resisting would be useless. And she asks if he believes that locking people up like cattle in an environment unfit to live in was right. Those are innocent children who lost their nation and their family. And if they were guilty, she would be the first to be punished. After all, before being the princess of the kingdom of Volga, she is a refugee seeking asylum. The argument there keeps going. And Philip says the situation is getting ugly. And changing the subject, the protagonist asks if he knows who that woman is. He says she's quite famous in the kingdom of Volga, since she doesn't care about the noble's judgment. He doesn't know why, but he heard that their kingdom fell into ruin and never imagined he would see Princess Reina in a place like this. Hearing that name, Simon is surprised, thinking that no matter how much he looks, he definitely thinks that is Katerina, wondering if she had reincarnated like he did. But there's no way she could have the same appearance as before. At that, the girl starts helping the child, but then the soldier says he can't allow her to do that, otherwise they'll be punished. And seeing that situation, the protagonist immediately charges at the soldier. And while punching the guy, he thinks that even if time passes and the world changes, this trash will never disappear. At that, the girl says that's enough already. And then right away, the boy comes back to his senses. But the other soldier obviously wasn't going to let that slide. And Philip, stepping into the situation, asks if their imperial law is more important than a life. Right then, of course, the soldier had no other way out. And then the two of them leave, right? Without wasting any time, Saban, calling the girl Katerina, rushes over to her, asking if she was hurt. But of course, the poor girl didn't understand anything, asking who he is. Saban asks if she doesn't recognize him, but she tells him not to come any closer, asking what difference there is between him and the guards who are doing that to those children. More importantly, he seems to be mistaking her for someone else, stating that her name is not Katerina, but Rainia. At that very moment, Phillips shows up to explain everything, and Saban remains there in silence, deep in thought, thinking about how he endured countless hours alone, even knowing she would never come back. But even so, he had made all that mess just because the two of them look alike. At that very moment, an old man appears asking what the princess was doing there. It can't be possible that she was fighting the guards again, and right after that, he asks who those people standing by her side were. The situation isn't very good, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't get too close to the princess. Then Saman says that all of this is nonsense. Even if it were true that he had misunderstood the situation, it doesn't change the fact that he had helped. He didn't do it expecting anything in return. But it would be nice if she at least said thank you, right? Yeah, at least he's right about that. And right after that, the brat casually turns his face away, and the old man says to just let them go. A little later, at the Arena of Giants, yet another one of the thousands of fights is taking place there. The protagonist and Phillips watch everything from afar, and then the winner is announced there in the middle of the arena. Phillips says he had gotten the bet right again, and if this keeps up, all their debts will be gone and they'll be able to get rich. And Simon, in the middle of that situation, thinks that all of this is pretty easy. The giants are based on golem magic, and he can easily determine the winner because he can see their mana flow. So the next fight was finally about to begin. And man, that giant there is different. Simon keeps watching everything in silence, and when the other gate opens, a smaller giant appears. And the protagonist, unbelievably enough, says to bet everything on him. Clearly, Phillips didn't understand a damn thing. And Simon says that he sees something different in that giant. A few minutes later, and sure enough, my friend, the small giant was managing to hold out in the battle. Unbelievably, he was even counterattacking. And right after that, the axe giant says he thought he was just an amateur, but now he sees he has some skills. But unfortunately, it's still not enough. Phillips, watching the battle from afar, thinks that giant was already going to lose, but Simon thinks the other giant has the advantage in terms of mana. So he wanted to know what they were thinking, because they weren't using any mana at all. The giant was already lying on the ground, and just as he was about to take a hit, he finally activates his mana. At that very moment, an explosion happens, and the giant simply vanished. The big monster had jumped and, summoning a magic circle, fires a blast of flame at the other giant. He was finally in the lead, and shortly after, the victory was finally awarded to him. Phillips says he believed in him the whole time, and the protagonist, surprised, asks if they had actually used magic. There's no way that's possible. And Phillips says the person piloting that giant is named Karen and is probably a runic knight. It's not very common to see giants using magic, but they must be hiding their strength to raise the bets. However, to Simon that doesn't matter, because the theory behind using magic through weapons is something he developed on his own, and that method, no matter how much time has passed, cannot be replicated by anyone else. After all, it's a process that concludes with the use of dark magic. A little later, Simon was still at the arena of giants, and Phillips just wouldn't stop talking. Simon says he's busy thinking and that Phillips wasn't helping much, and on the other side, an old man says she can still change her mind, because there's no way she can go into a fight with a giant like that. Unbelievably, the one over there on the other side was Princess Reina, and the two of them just keep watching. The old man asks why she agreed to a duel like this, because she'll have to marry the count if she loses. And that's not a decision she can make lightly. But she says she made that choice carefully, because if she hadn't accepted, a lot of refugees would have been killed and gone hungry. In other words, to save everyone, this was the only way. The two keep arguing there, and the old man says that fighting with a giant that's falling apart obviously won't be enough to win. You want so badly to protect the refugees, but you don't value your own life. And right after that, Samian loses interest and says they should just leave already. And while walking through the place, he says she's definitely not Katarina, so there's no need to get involved in this, right? But then, the old man says she's just selling herself. The count is a man who stops at nothing to get what he wants and has even threatened the refugees many times. Without the princess, the refugees will be helpless, and unless the mana stone is completely replaced, that giant won't even be operational. He should definitely listen to the old man. And she says she's aware of that, but even so, she can't give up, because if she loses without even trying, there won't be anyone left to defend the weak. And at that very moment, Simon cuts into the conversation, asking if he could take a look at the giant, mentioning that that mana stone and the giant might still be usable. Right away, the old man tells him to stay away from the princess, because it all seems way too convenient, and they were probably assassins sent by the count. Hearing that, the protagonist was about to lose it, and Phillips says that he is the 15th descendant of the Lacan family. Even so, the old man was still suspicious, asking how they could trust them. But Princess Reina asks the old man to step aside, apologizing for their previous encounter. Apparently, he heard the whole situation, and even though it's embarrassing to admit, they won't have many options. So she would like to ask a favor, and Simon immediately gets ready, saying he'll make sure to show a bit of his skills. Our boy finally gets inside the giant, and the redhead says that giants can't be repaired by just anyone. He'll probably just damage the giant even more. Right then, Philip shows up, asking if they want to make a bet. He'll bet 10,000 pesos that his young lord can easily fix the giant. The three of them stay there in that healthy argument, and soon after, Princess Reina asks if she could know something. And looking at the protagonist, she asks if a tool like that is used to repair giants. Right then, man, the protagonist cuts his hand and nobody understood a damn thing. The kid asks them to just keep watching and invoking his blessed magic. At that very moment, a magic circle appears on the armor. Then a flashback appears with Simon in his past, asking his golem if it had really fallen into a place like this. They are immortal beings that drag their enemies into a hell, ordering it to answer his call once more. At that same moment, all the golems immediately rise up, and returning to the present, man, that giant starts working again. Nobody could believe what had happened, and Reina thinks she can't believe he was able to revive a dead magic crystal. She has never heard of such magic existing in her life, and surely the whole world would be astonished by an event like this. The kid gets down from the giant as if it were nothing, and the redhead was still suspicious, saying it must be some kind of trick, or that he might even have used black magic. Hearing that, Phillips gets pissed and asks if he's implying that the sole heir of the Lacan family was using black magic. And with no other choice, our boy says he'll explain, because the truth is that this is an ultra-secret technique passed down by the Lacan family, preserved and hidden for nearly 500 years. Wow, he really went with that. The redhead asks, what kind of family of swordsmen has a secret magical technique? However, Reina says that isn't important right now, and even if it were black magic, he saved countless lives. She doesn't know how she'll be able to reward him for that, but she wants to thank him and also apologize for what happened last time. And with everything settled, the girl says he got hurt because of her, so he has to let her tend to his wounds. At least, the shameless protagonist says she can make herself comfortable, and at that very moment, another person appears saying he can't find a certain knight named Andre anywhere. Then the scene changes to another place, and a soldier says that now the princess doesn't have any knight she can use, and it seems they somehow managed to repair the giant. The blondie asks if he didn't say their giant couldn't be activated, and the poor guy there on the floor apologizes profusely. However, he made a serious mistake, saying that he is definitely fired. Then the blondie asks if there wasn't any other variable. After all, there can't be even the slightest chance that Princess Reina would not be completely his, and soon everyone will know what kind of person the Master of Monarchy is. The scene then shifts to the Arena of Giants, and the commentators were introducing the fight between Princess Reina and the Count. The guy's giant is literally absurd, completely armored up. However, on the other hand, the other giant simply still hadn't appeared. Everyone in the stands starts getting nervous, telling them to give their money back, and the Count, full of himself, already thinks he had won. At that very moment, a flashback appears with everyone nervous because they no longer had a pilot. They had been betrayed at a crucial moment like this, and soon after, Saman asks if she can't participate, she'll have to marry the Count. And if that's the case, he believes he could help her with that too. Reina asks how he could do that, and Philip says it's not that he doesn't believe in him, but he surely hasn't forgotten what happened the last time he tried to operate a giant. However, the kid tells him not to worry, and returning to the present, the armored giant finally appears. The spoiled Count, furious, asks if he didn't say there were no more pilots on the princess's side, and the poor guy beside him says he was sure of it, which means she probably hired someone else. But he's sure that person doesn't realize the importance of this battle. It's almost unbelievable that someone so desperate exists that they would dare stand by the princess in his territory. And there in the stands, the old man and the princess are relieved that they arrived in time. At first glance, the difference in the giant's performance is enormous. But the opposing pilot is also the champion of lamer territory. However, Saman there at the side says everything will be fine. Wait, I thought he was going to pilot the giant. Then the protagonist says that although he normally seemed a little slow, that man is actually pretty skilled. Man, it's Phillips who's piloting. The battle was about to begin, and the crowd in the stands wanted to know if they were really going to go into battle with a giant like that. Everyone starts making fun of that heap of junk, and the giant on the other side says he'll applaud the fact that he didn't run away. However, he should be aware of what this match is worth, and he certainly has no intention of going easy. And without wasting any time, he charges at the other giant. In the middle of that situation, Phillips thinks that, as expected, his power really lives up to his size. But man, the kid managed to block the blow. Just saying. Just because he's big and strong doesn't mean he fights well. At that very moment, the golden giant tries to launch an attack, but Phillips manages to dodge, thinking that this is really dangerous. And meanwhile, the battle keeps going. The pilot on the other side seemed to be under some kind of stress. After all, Phillips just wouldn't stop dodging the attacks, right? The old man says they won't win if he keeps running forever, and Seber continues just silently observing, thinking that the boy has already faced a bunch of knights before, so there's no doubt that he's a good knight. However, he'll have to find a way to teach him better later, and still continuing to run. Phillips says that guy never gets tired. If that's the case, then there's no other way, right? And then, in desperation, he lands an attack on the golden giant, but it didn't have much effect, and it only made the guy even more nervous. He raises his weapon, and then the commentator says that this is the champion's blessed finishing move. Phillips just watches, and at that same instant, an explosion happens in the arena. And when the dust settles, the golden giant says that's unbelievable. After all, he managed to dodge his attack. Next, Phillips says he has no choice but to win since the protagonist is counting on him. And summoning his power, he says he'll make him regret for the rest of his life, making him show this now. The guy is at full power. And the pilot on the other side is surprised to see an aura like that at such a young age, and it seems he has finally found a worthy opponent. But then, man, the Count appears on his screen right away, and man, the guy didn't seem very happy, right, about dragging out a match like this. With no other choice, the guy will have to activate everything at once. And now the fight is going to get more serious. My man, the golden giant charges at him all at once, delivering his blow. But at that same instant, he is counterattacked. Of course, the guy couldn't believe that aura and speed, wondering if that was possible. But then he remembers that person who had disappeared 3 years ago, who was the invincible legend of the giant arena. That's the so-called Phantom of the Black Knight. And then the guy is finally defeated. The stands go wild, and the guy in the golden armor says he never thought he'd encounter the Black Knight once again. Phillips asks if he happens to know him, and the warrior mentions that he had the chance to fight him in the Royal Arena 3 years ago. He disappeared after setting an impressive record, asking why he is in a place like this. Who replies that since he's the Black Knight, it's only natural to help people in need. Anyway, he wanted him to keep the secret about who he is. And the guy says that's fine, since he's gonna get fired anyway, right? Meanwhile, up in the stands, everyone was happy that they had won, and Saman, observing the situation, thinks that this is probably already enough. he can finally leave without feeling guilty. Looking at the betting board, he thinks it's an easy world to make money in. A short time later, the protagonist was finally leaving that city. Raina says she doesn't know how to thank him for everything he did, and Saman says she doesn't need to worry about that because everything he did was simply to help however he could. However, the girl says it must have been hard to help them like that, and she wishes she could have shown her gratitude, at least properly. But for Saman, everything is fine already, because if they hadn't found her, they wouldn't have made so much money. To be honest, I wanted to stay there longer, but since they caused such a huge scene, I think it's better to leave before your identity is revealed. The two keep talking a little more, and Saman says he thinks it would be better for her to leave that area as soon as possible. Because if that guy is willing to do something like that, he definitely won't give up on her easily. He's probably planning his next moves, and then the old man says he's right and they need to leave, while Count Monarch has no reason to keep them there. At that, Saman says he understands that she's worried about the refugees, but even if she stays there, there's nothing she can do to help all of them. In other words, to have a better future. He thinks it would be wise for her to take a step back for now, and the girl, interrupting our hero, says she already knows that. This is hard, but even if it seems stubborn and ignorant right now, she can't just leave her people without someone to rely on. Even if it's only a little, she wants to do everything she can, and hearing that, Saman says he understands. The two say their goodbyes, and then, finally, they leave on the boat. However, there were extra people aboard, and Phillips asks why they brought those idiots along. Saman asks if they're supposedly going to use the giants without anyone to repair them, and Phillips questions whether the protagonist couldn't just repair them himself. The two keep arguing there, and some time later, they finally arrived at the Lacan estate. That merchant from earlier was inside the house, taking everything he could carry. He says he believed it when the protagonist said he would pay such a huge debt, but even so, he betrayed his people and ran away in the middle of the night. At that very moment, Phillips appears and introducing himself. He says he is the young lord's escort knight. The guy stares at the brat and then asks where the protagonist is, who says he was there to deliver something to him. And opening the chest, the boy had a whole pile of gold coins. The merchant couldn't believe they managed to do that in less than a week. And now, unfortunately, he won't be able to take his territory. Right. At that, Phillips, making up an excuse, asks if they can't see that Lord Durham is busy, ordering them to load up that money and leave at once before they waste a single second more of his time. However, the man says there's no need to rush, because he'll wait a bit to receive the protagonist in person. Right then, Phillips gives a smile and taking out a letter says that it is a message from the young master to him. Now that they have paid their debt, he is considered a trespasser and suggests that he prepare himself if he intends to stay and make a scene. According to Article 36 of the Imperial Laws, nobles whose territory or a building under their care has been invaded have the right to execute the invaders. Boy, the brat thought of everything, and unless he doesn't value his life, he should return immediately. With that, my friend, the message has been delivered, and Lord Durham, without wasting any time, gets the hell out of the protagonist's estate. With everything settled, Phillips says that at least those people now know the young master is scary. But now they can all rest easy because they finally managed to pay off the debt. However, my friend, the opposite was happening, and everyone rushes at Phillips wanting to know where Master Lacan's blessed statue was. The soldier asks where the young master is, and it can't be possible that something happened to him. The brat tries to say something, but then everyone interrupts him. The scene then shifts to another place, specifically to the Demon King's tower. Our boy was entering that place, and looking around, he realizes it's a complete mess. Obviously, they weren't going to take care of this place, right? And turning on the lights, he says he should at least be grateful it's still standing after 500 years. He looks at the stairs and then remembers his best moments by his wife's side, thinking that this is the last place filled with memories of her. No matter what happens, he will definitely protect this place. That is the only thing that matters. And leaning against a wall, he says he hopes that thing still works. At that very moment, a bunch of lights appear, and then a huge door opens. The brat is happy that everything is working normally, and looking at the situation, he wonders if he should then take what is rightfully his. The best way to fight a curse is to have mana stronger than the curse itself. He had heard that advice a long time ago, but at the moment it is the only solution he has, and using his mana he opens that door, saying that it has been 5 centuries since the last time he was there. And he did a good job protecting his home. He looks at a jar that was in front of him, and Saman says it's been a long time, calling that thing the Demon Harith. Then a flashback appears with the protagonist back when he was the Demon King. Apparently he was invading some place, and looking at a being, he asks if he is the ruler of that place. The girl says she heard that he had already brought down several fortresses, and honestly thought he would be an old man. However, incredibly enough, he is very young, and because of that she is disappointed. It is quite impressive for a human, however, and since she is so moved by his hard work, she will show a little mercy, saying that he may ask whatever is on his mind. After all, it is only fair to satisfy his curiosity before he is killed. Next, Saman says that she is the chattiest high-ranking demon he has ever met, asking whether a being like that gets ranked higher the more they talk. Then, my friend, the demon becomes furious, saying that he got that ignorance from defeating a few lower demons. However, she will show him that the demons there are nothing like the ones he has faced before. However, the protagonist tells her not to worry because he has not yet reached the point of going to the battlefield completely alone. Man, just look at the size of the golem. The girl is surprised, and right after that, at that very instant, the battle begins in the middle of that hall. The fight goes all out, and the two of them just keep watching. They stare each other down, and then finally, they go at each other one-on-one. And shortly after victory is finally given to the protagonist, the girl asks what he intends to do after converting her into demonic energy, or if by any chance he was planning to change the world. However, Saemon says she does not need to know anything, but either way she will be reborn as demonic energy. Then the scene finally returns to the present, with Saemon thinking that the process of bringing down that woman was much harder than any other. If you absorb powerful demonic energy the wrong way, many bad things can happen. He personally witnessed people turning into horrifying creatures because of it. He could not absorb it back then because of the high risk, but when he learned the correct method to absorb demonic energy safely, he had already reached the 9th circle and no longer needed it. And honestly, he did not expect to have to use it now, 5 centuries later. And after swallowing that stone, the kid starts feeling the effect immediately. And at that very instant, he seems to have some kind of hallucination. Looking around, our boy thinks this is probably the so-called realm of the mind. Apparently, he was not swallowed up by the demonic energy, so there is probably something else there too, right? In the middle of that smoke, there was someone, and man, it was that demon from before. However, she does not recognize our boy, asking who he is, and he thinks that it will definitely be hard to withstand all that with his current body. It has already been 500 years, but she still has this enormous amount of demonic energy. And then he says that he came there to borrow her power. And at that very instant, the girl apparently recognizes our hero, and grabbing him by the neck, she says that he is completely weak now. Honestly, she almost did not recognize him, and changing the subject, asks what brings him there. He says that he had already said it before, since he needs to borrow her power. However, she questions whether he is sure that will be possible, especially with such a fragile body. The enemy who imprisoned her there for centuries came there in a pitiful state, wishing for her strength, asking whether he does not find that funny too. And Saemon, meanwhile, can barely endure it, thinking that she could snap his neck at any moment. And taking his hand off the girl's arm, he asks whether she is okay with that. After all, he came there with a fairly decent proposal, asking whether she is simply going to kill him, thinking that the girl probably wants his body as a source of magic, so she probably will not kill him. Next, the woman, incredibly enough, lets go of the boy, saying that she will at least acknowledge his courage, asking whether he thinks he will be able to withstand her power, even with his circle destroyed. Saemon says that if he cannot, she can simply take over his body and there are no disadvantages for her, since she was trapped there for centuries. And accepting the offer, the girl casts her magic on the protagonist, saying that she will toy with him because of the time she was trapped there, and that he should at least be able to endure this. Watching the situation, Saemon wonders whether that is the so-called mind control, but the poor guy has no time to think. And the demon asks where all his pride went. Bluffing is the only thing he can do, asking whether she thinks he has the same mana and magic circle he had in the past. However, the kid says that even without power, with his circle destroyed, he would never become a victim of mind control. At that very instant, our hero disappears. And man, the one who was the victim now was the girl. She was about to be consumed by Saemon, but at the same time, the magic is undone. The girl says that she already knew that would happen from the start, but it is still impressive that he really reached the 9th circle. Saemon asks whether he has to show anything else, but she says she simply meant that even though he reached that level, it seems he was unable to change this world. However, he says that it is not over yet because somehow he will manage to complete that goal. Hearing that, the girl smiles, asking whether he will be able to reach the 9th circle once again, especially with a body like that. He is certainly very confident, but even if he housed her in his body, the 6th or 7th circle would be his limit for what he could cast. Either way, she will let him do whatever he wants with the world. And so she enters our hero's body, saying that he'll have to work hard so he doesn't disappoint her, right? The scene then finally returns to the mansion, and the kid didn't seem to be doing very well. Summoning his mana, he realizes that she's only at the 3rd circle, but just having a foundation is already more than enough. Anyway, if the demon Horeth had wanted to, she could have taken control of his body a long time ago, so he'll have to live up to her expectations. Since he knows the theory of enlightenment behind each circle, reaching the 9th circle probably won't be that big of a problem. However, gathering demonic energy to reach that circle will definitely take a considerable amount of time, and for that reason he needs to start acting immediately. And opening yet another door, he finds an old magic circle, saying that it has been resting for 500 years and it's already time to start working again. Placing his hand on the magic circle, the magic awakens, and Saemon says that now they'll have to help him with his plan. Then the scene returns to the city of Lamer, and man, I'm going to be honest, that count didn't seem to be doing very well. He says that no matter how much he thinks about it, there's something very strange going on. Even if the difference in performance between the giants was 5-fold, losing like that was unacceptable. He was probably working with Reina in secret, but of course the guy says he would never do that and swore loyalty to him a long time ago. However, that isn't enough to convince the Count, asking if that's all he has to say. And having no other choice, the young man says he knows something about the pilot of the other giant. 3 years ago, he faced him in the Imperial Arena of the Giants, and he was a knight famous for never being defeated. They left not long after that, so probably no one knows his identity. Then he says, "All right, I get it," and heads on. With everything explained, the Count says he thinks he has nothing else useful to say, and the guy slashes the poor bastard with his knife. Next, the guy with glasses says that Princess Reina remained in the city of Lamer, and it seems that the reason she's staying is because of the refugees. Hearing that, the man orders him to keep an eye on the girl's whereabouts, and besides that, he has to investigate the pilot who was controlling that giant from earlier. More specifically, find out immediately where he lives. After all, he's going to personally see what that man is made of. For a long time, the Laken family has prospered because of the nearby river and the fertile land. However, most have already left, leaving many houses abandoned. There are already 3 villages on the verge of becoming ghost towns, asking what he thinks about this problem. The protagonist simply tied up one of his subordinates, who asks why he's doing this, and Saman says he's playing dumb, because that problem is probably his fault. But the guy says there was nothing he could do about it, and that he really tried his best. Saman asks if he really gave it his all, and the guy had nothing to say and was just trying to survive, right? The protagonist says he'd love to hang him in the middle of the square as an example, but the more he looked into his past, the more interesting he became. Apparently, he's a talented individual recognized by the Empire. However, he turned down offers from other estates and decided to come here. He had asked for the finance books from the last 10 years to see how he was doing, and he really brought him everything in one day without a single mistake. Honestly, he's very useful. And hearing that, the old man gets all happy, saying he's very good at arithmetic. He can solve all kinds of math problems in his head. And then Samon says that's exactly the problem. And grabbing the guy by the collar of his shirt, the young man literally throws him off the mountain. The protagonist follows along after him. Meanwhile, and then the guy falls down there. Not understanding anything, he asks what the protagonist was doing, and looking up, he realizes there's a town there, wondering if those people really are residents of the Viscounty. It's impossible that this could be happening, because there shouldn't be a single slum like this. Seven in turn asks what it's like to see the village with his own eyes and says you can't reduce human life to numbers alone. He needs to spend time with them and find out for himself what's happening in the Viscounty. And if he can't find the cause, then he won't be working for them anymore. The guy asks if he's going to fire him, and Seven asks if he wants to give up now. And right then, my friend, the guy immediately goes to meet the residents. And Seaman thinks it's fine just watching the Lycan house there, but there's a better time for that. After all, before anything else, he needs to improve this place so that he can increase his circle. The scene then shifts elsewhere, with the others unable to believe that the protagonist paid off all the debts just by gambling. Philip simply confirms that it was true, and the others say the family's image will fall if people find out about this, asking why Phillips didn't stop him. Then one of the soldiers calls out to Phillips, asking if our hero's identity wasn't revealed. He says of course not. After all, he's not that stupid, right? However, then he remembers that he revealed the protagonist's name at that moment, and man, honestly, nothing good is going to come for the poor guy now, huh? He says he ended up being way too stupid. However, he had not revealed his identity during the games. The butler says that even so, it is only a matter of time until everyone knows, and considering the Count's intelligence, all the news will reach him. And it is possible that they might even start some kind of war. And if he were to do that, realistically, there is nothing they could do. Count Monarch expanded his territories through wars, and they basically just gave him one more reason to start another one. And then, at that very moment, the protagonist appears on the scene, asking where those who said the family's reputation is important are, and whether they are saying they should simply ignore the evil acts happening right in front of them. The soldier says they are only speaking realistically because their military strength is nothing compared to Count Monarch's. The only thing they wanted to do was warn that his decisions had basically put the entire house in danger. And hearing that, Seaman asks whether they earned their hero titles by licking the boots of those in power, and whether they were not considered heroes because they fought even in the most unfavorable situations in the name of justice. The butler says that the people there are giving it their all. And then the protagonist asks whether the problems have been solved. Even so, they are making this huge fuss just because he had made a bet. The two keep arguing there, and Seaman says that having a good reputation does not fill empty stomachs. His duty is to protect the people, and the people of the Viscounty are starving and dying because the living conditions are completely unbearable. Even so, he does not have the ability to prioritize things properly. Wow, the protagonist is absolutely roasting these people. Honestly, he will not tolerate this kind of behavior again, and surely everything will change from now on. If you believe his orders are wrong, you may leave whenever you want, and those who cannot follow his orders will be dismissed. Approaching Phillips, he says that the boy did very well and is as skilled as the captain. Hearing that, the kid is surprised, and Seaman says he thinks it is only fair that someone so skilled should be the captain of the knights, asking what Rogers thinks, who says that whoever wins the duel will be appointed captain of the knights. At once, Phillips becomes desperate, saying that this is his uncle, the one who taught him how to use a sword. However, the guy, unbelievably enough, accepts, saying that until now he had never had the chance to prove his skills. Seaman says he hopes he is as good as he thinks he is, and a short while later, the two were finally about to begin their duel. Phillips says he will do his best, and the two draw their swords. The duel finally begins. Seaman thinks that it seems Phillips is a little nervous, assuming Rogers might actually be quite powerful. At that moment, the kid summons his aura, charging at Rogers. However, the man easily blocks it, saying that it seems his skills have improved. Phillips says that things are different now, and at that very moment, charges once again toward his uncle. He keeps circling his target, and the soldier says that it seems he is not messing around. After appearing behind the man, he says that then the young lord praised him for good reason. However, to become a blade that protects the family, he needs to train much more. The guy literally threw him to the ground. With that, Phillips was easily defeated and is thrown away. Even so, the boy still did not give up, but at that very moment, Rogers places his sword at the boy's neck, saying that the fight has definitely come to an end. Having no other choice, the boy had to surrender. right? And in the middle of that situation, the soldier asks the young master whether that is enough to show why he is the commander of the knights. And seeing all that, the boy gets really excited, saying that all of this is impressive. A short while later, the whole group was training and Roger says they had better not give up after all. The young master is watching them. On the other side, Samian says he never thought he would lose so easily. And Philip says that Uncle Rogers is among the 5 best swordsmen on the continent. The poor guy was completely upside down, and the protagonist says he intends to select him as his official escort, asking Phillips to make sure he does whatever is necessary to fulfill that role. And hearing that, my friend, the kid gets emotional right away, saying that he will do his best and that to become the blade that protects him, he will become worthy of his trust. Samian says that if that is the case, then he has to hurry and join their training right away. And to think that 10 of the 50 knights would be considered specialists, and he thinks they can thank their warrior family lineage for that. Those 2 are incredible talents that most people would wish to have, and if that is the case, then it is clear why the family is in this state. And the scene then changes to some time later, with the servant asking what he thinks he is doing. First, he sells the statue, and now he is selling all the family's treasures, asking whether he intends to throw away the honor and name of his group. And Samian says that if it gives him money, then he intends to do it. However, of course, the servant was not going to accept this time, asking why he is doing all of that. The guy really was not taking it well, and the protagonist merely watches in silence, saying that the warrior of Lacan died 500 years ago, which means those treasures will not help them at all now, asking him to think a little. It is because of these old principles, doing everything in the name of the Lacan warrior's honor, that the family has ended up in its current state. It was because of vassals like them that the family name fell into ruin. But my friend, the old man says that's impossible, because if it weren't for the Demon King's curse, none of this would have happened. And Simon says that attitude is another problem, because they praise their predecessors for their prosperity, and then blame the Demon King for their downfall. Anyway, he intends to become someone greater than the warrior of Lacan. So, if you intend to remain bound by your family's old principles, he'll erase him from your group's history. The kid isn't messing around. Shortly after, the servants ask if Hens was alright. He says he remembers the time he held the protagonist in his arms while reading him a book, and honestly, he can't believe how much he has changed. The way he constantly visited the Demon King's castle had no explanation, which means he is certain that he must be the Demon King's curse. The scene then shifts to the protagonist. Phillips asks if he can't follow Hans's advice at least this once, because what he just said was very insensitive. However, our hero says his thoughts are a little different. After all, he doesn't intend to give Hans even a single moment to think. Anyway, they can talk about that later, asking whether he finished the task he had given him. And a little later, the scene shifts somewhere else. Samon says that this is different from what Phillips said. The guy in the cell was completely worn out, and the young man, noticing someone was outside, asks who they are. At that very moment, our hero begins to feel that immense pressure, thinking he is certain that this is the power of a 5th circle. Or maybe it could be even more powerful than that. And the guy who was not friendly at all speaks again, telling them to answer who they are. At that, Samian says he heard he had been locked up there for a long time, but it seems he was doing just fine, asking what the Fife's only Iron Mage is doing wasting away in a place like this. And realizing who it was, the old man asks why the young lord would set foot in a place like this because of him. He asks if he thought he would do nothing while someone loafed around in his territory. He heard that he had been harming himself by abstaining from food and drink, and that was why Hans locked him up there. The man says that's exactly right, because he lost consciousness due to an accident with the giant caused by his carelessness, and he wants nothing more than to waste away in that place. But Samian questions whether he really believes his life is worth that much, and besides, it has already been confirmed that the accident with the giant was not his fault. However, the old man says that if only he had examined it more carefully, it probably would not have happened. All of this was his fault, asking to be punished severely. But my friend, the protagonist, was already getting pissed off at that situation, thinking that he understood the man was unbelievably loyal. But this was going way too far, saying that since that's what he wants, he'll do as he wishes, telling Phillips to bring his sword at once. The boy didn't understand a damn thing, and the old man seemed to have already accepted his fate. And Samian says that since he begged for it, he'll give him a proper punishment. He raises his sword and then breaks the young man's chains. The guy didn't understand a damn thing, asking what this means. He says he would profit much more by using him. After all, he can't stand taking losses, right? Anyway, he is planning to make him work until the end of his life, and telling Phillips to throw that sack on the floor, a pile of gold coins appears. The protagonist says it's not much, but there are around 70,000 pesos there, telling him to use that money and prepare to build the magic tower. He can buy whatever grimoires he needs, and he must also secure the necessary equipment to repair and manufacture the giants. Unlike the lords of the past, he plans to invest heavily in magic, telling him to make sure an incident like this never happens again. At that moment, the man starts getting emotional, saying that he caused him so much trouble, yet ended up receiving such a great reward. But Samian says he doesn't understand what he's talking about, because all of this is nothing more and nothing less than a mere punishment. So he has to decide quickly, since he doesn't intend to forgive him that easily, right? And then the man kneels, saying that he is the Iron Mage of the Lacan family, and until the day of his death, he swears that he will dedicate his life to atoning for his sins. Seeing that, Phillips is surprised, saying that as expected of Lord Moody, that Mena is incredible. And so, my friend, everything was already settled. And meanwhile, the servant Haynes was watching everything from afar, thinking that Simon managed to persuade a man as stubborn as Muti. He really is incredible, but for some reason he is still wary. And so, a month passes after that mess, and Hans, watching everything from afar, thinks that the family is progressing little by little. Phillips, who was far from being a dedicated person, is now training more than anyone else. Besides that, Muti, who had hidden himself away in shame after the mistakes of his past, is now taking the initiative in training recruits. At that very moment, another person appears, saying it's been a very long time. Man, that little guy from before came back, and Hans, surprised, asks where he had been all this time. He says it's a very long story, but he thinks it would be better to explain while showing him. And when they return to that same beat-up little town from before, man, it almost looked like a completely different place. Unlike before, anyone can now sell their products freely. This was decided together with all the residents there. On top of that, they're even discussing together how to improve the fief, and the old inefficient traditions are being abolished, asking Hans whether he doesn't think the fief should have been like this from the start. At that point, there was no other way, and the butler thinks he has no choice but to agree. However, he cannot deny that everything happening now goes against 500 years of the Lacan family's policies. A little later, the captain of the knights says he had the same concerns Hans has now. However, he left all that behind since the protagonist proved himself through results, and because of that, he has nothing more to say. And as he gets up to leave, he asks whether he doesn't think it's his duty to place all his trust in the young lord. The guy finally leaves the room, and the servant remains deep in thought, mentioning that in such a short period of time, everyone has already been won over. Then a week passes, and the servant says he organized all the documents he had asked for. Besides that, he will take care of the office matter tomorrow, and if anything else comes up, he can let him know. Meanwhile, a bunch of water was dripping from the ceiling, and Hans says he could fix that himself. However, Simon tells him to focus on his priorities, because those who have nowhere to shelter from the rain are overflowing in his fief. He has to think about those people first. And on the other hand, my friend, little by little the butler was seeing what the right thing to do was, thinking that the more he got to know the Lord, the more he wanted to follow him. But anyway, he will still have to determine what his true intentions are. A little later, the servant was walking through the forest, apparently following the protagonist, thinking that every night he secretly comes to some place. And these regular visits are actually straight to the Demon King's castle. Honestly, he didn't even want to consider it, but there is a possibility that the young master had been overtaken by the Demon King's curse. Right then, the kid stops in the middle of nowhere, and then a group of people appears. Simon asks if they took care of what he had asked for, and the bald guy says of course they did. After all, it was nothing major, right? And seeing everything from afar, Hans was surprised, thinking those men were the same bandits who had been banished from his fief for looting. Assuming they had been hiding in that place the whole time, and there seemed to be a lot of them. The protagonist says they work really fast, but anyway, they should get started already, right? The bearded guy there says he understood everything perfectly, thanks to the book Simon had given him. And meanwhile, Hans was wondering why the protagonist had given a book to those thieves. It was too far away to hear anything, and he wondered what the Lord was trying to do. And then the whole village says that thanks to him, they are no longer illiterate, thanking him for everything the Lord has done so far. Because of him, even the children can read now, and thanks to the medicine he brought, his wife can walk again. Thanks to him, his whole family is able to live well. The protagonist gets all embarrassed, saying he's happy to be able to help. However, everything has a price, and he is sure they are prepared. The bearded man says, of course they are, because even if they have to live as bandits, they are not ungrateful animals, telling him to make his request, because he will do whatever he orders. With that, our boy smiles, and taking everything out of the bag, the guy had a whole bunch of books and gold coins. No one understood anything that was happening, and Simon says the answer is inside the books, and when they read them, they will probably understand. Apparently that there is a land transfer, and Simon says those documents recognize them as official residents of his territory, and with them they will have the right to claim that place as land for themselves. He's going to build a town near there, and they will be able to live there. Hearing all that, the older man says they are just thieves who betrayed their lord, and after everything they cannot accept that. Unfortunately, they do not have the right to accept a gift like that. And although they are grateful, unfortunately they will not accept it. At that, the protagonist says he knows that very well. After all, even if they had no choice, looting is a very serious crime. However, the fact that the Lacan family forced them to do it is another crime he cannot forgive. Although they stole from others, he honestly believes they still have a chance to atone for their crimes. Anyway, that money is only half a year's pay, and from now on they will become his mercenaries. What is this? Is the guy trying to form a village gang? This will be their path to atoning for their sins, and it is the future that he could at least offer them. However, the path they will walk until that future depends only on them, and for that reason, he will continue trusting his group. With that, my friend, there was no other way. And so the entire village swears loyalty to our hero. And seeing everything from afar, Hans thinks that bandits inside the territory were considered targets for subjugation. At least that was the rule of the Lacan family in the past. The scene then shifts to another place, with Philip saying they have already spent almost all the money they brought from Lamer, asking what they should do now, and Simon tells him to just shut up, asking if he brought the records on the development of the mines. As for that, there are only records of failed attempts, and although they tried searching their territory, there was not a single sign of a mine anywhere. At that, Saman asks why they went into debt over something with so little chance of success, and the boy says it was because that was their only option at the time. Basically, they were in terrible shape because of some unfortunate events that happened in a short period of time. And after looking at the situation, Saman realizes things were bad, and it is basically impossible to maintain the territory like this. However, there is something strange, because there should be at least one mine, asking why there are no records in that place. Philip says that is the Rokia mountain range, and exploring the area was very difficult due to the abundance of monsters. Even though they sent their knights there a few times to explore, because of the monsters hidden in every corner of the region, they had no choice but to return empty-handed. Saman asks if that means they could not explore the region, and Phillips, more or less understanding what was going on, asks him not to come up with any weird plans. However, it was already too late, and a short while later, in that blasted mountain range, the protagonist says he thought Phillips was exaggerating as always. But my partner this time, he was right. There are monsters everywhere. Even so, this is very strange because these monsters should live in separate regions, wondering why they are cooperating with each other. It cannot be that they adapted to dealing with humans, and at that very moment, one of the creatures charges at our hero. He starts dodging the attacks while another massive wave of creatures rushes at him. Summoning his magic, the kid says they think they are very powerful, but from now on he will deal with them himself. At that very moment, a bunch of stone golems appear, and now the real mess is about to begin. One of the monsters attacks the golem, but of course that was not going to do anything. The giant stone monster counterattacks, hurling the beast far away. Seeing the situation, Saman says this is much better than he expected. And as time passes, the golems keep defeating more and more of the creatures that were in the forest. Even so, those things keep appearing, and he understands why the knights have failed until now. Dealing with all that is definitely difficult, but obviously it is not impossible. At that very moment, another monster appears, and judging by its aura, it is probably the leader. With no other choice, the protagonist will have to join the fight himself, and advancing toward the monster, he says he really does not have much time to spare. He places his hand on the orc's head, trying to use some kind of brainwashing. Apparently it worked, and a few minutes later, that big beast was under the protagonist's command too. Now the tables have completely turned, and with no other choice, the monsters finally stop attacking him. And the boy, full of confidence, says he will not hurt anyone as long as they take him to their leader. A few minutes later, Saman, releasing one of the goblins, says he has a question to ask. He had heard there is a place where dwarves come and go, asking if anyone knows anything about it. But all the monsters remain silent, and Saman thinks he expected that, of course. However, right then, one of the monsters tells him not to worry, and kneeling down says he will guide him to that place. So after some time passes, the kid is standing in front of a pile of rocks. The boy asks if this is the entrance, and the goblin says that is exactly right. Apparently, all of that is the remains of an avalanche, and there could probably be something inside. However, for some reason, all those monsters were very frightened, and Simon says he does not know what it is, but he will only find out if he goes in. Casting a spell, he blows open that passage, and right away our boy smiles, saying that this is definitely a mine. Even so, those monsters are still scared, telling them they can leave now. In exchange, they must never hurt humans again and spend their time in peace until he gives orders. Until then, they must remain hidden. And with all the creatures leaving, Saman says they will surely be useful at some point. Anyway, he will have to take a look at that mine. Good thing you warned his subordinates ahead of time. Then he says, "All right, I get it," and heads on. In the past, with their overwhelming techniques and strength, humans basically oppressed the other races. They basically wanted only humans to remain across the entire continent. And that is why Saman, known as the Demon King, began burning down one kingdom after another. In other words, to the other races, he was basically their savior. The scene then shifts to the Demon King's tower, and the protagonist, in his glory days, was sitting on his throne, saying that there are not even 10 surviving compatriots left. The monster remains silent, and Saman tells them to make a base for them in a different territory, and have them do the construction work. The monster, overjoyed, simply gives thanks, and Saman asks if there is anyone else left. And soon after, someone shows up, saying that apparently he's the last one, asking if it's really okay to make an old man wait so long. The protagonist is surprised, thinking he can't believe a dwarf, a race from the earth known for having the greatest technology, came all the way there, saying that honestly he never dreamed he would get to meet an ancient dwarf. And the guy says he's quite smart, since it wouldn't be easy to tell just from his appearance. Saman then asks why he came there, and says he can't believe that not even humans would be a match for them. The dwarf says humans lack technology and destroy nature indiscriminately, and because of them many ecosystems were ruined. Hearing that, Saman asks if he's saying he intends to help someone who plans to wipe them out. The guy says that's exactly right, because if he does that, then they'll use their technology to improve his base. But then my buddy, the protagonist, says that he's human too, and asks if he'll still help him anyway. But right then, the guy lets out a laugh, saying that he is definitely the Demon King. The scene then finally returns to the present, and as Saman walks through the cave, he says that dwarf mentioned there was a huge mine there, and he was definitely right. After so much time, it should have been pretty worn down by now, but surprisingly, it was very well preserved, stating that the dwarf's skills truly are unmatched. There are many ores there, and as long as they have people willing to work as miners, his fief won't have to worry about anything for now. But at that very moment, our boy notices something. After all, the mine's construction stopped right there in front of him, and looking to the side, he thinks that after he died, he heard this place had been occupied by humans. Even so, there are many valuable items scattered around, and no matter how rushed they were, they wouldn't have made a mistake like that. There's definitely something wrong here, and at that very moment, the entire cave starts to shake. Something was moving across the ground there, and man, nothing good was coming from that. And right then, my buddy Samon finally understands the reason the monsters were completely terrified. That thing is some kind of mine master. But the protagonist, not caring about any of that, is obviously going to take down something like that, right? Without wasting any time, the kid summons 2 of his golems, and man, the fight was about to begin. Right then, the big beast lets out a roar, and at the same time, the golems charge at the monster. Things weren't easy for anyone, especially in a closed place like that. The protagonist, totally calm, watches everything from afar, and with a leap, he fires a burst of flames at that creature. That should be enough to make him feel more at ease, but surprisingly, it has no effect. Samon thinks that he knows his magic has weakened, but even so, that thing managed to withstand his attack without even getting a single scratch. At that very moment, that thing manages to break free from the golem's grasp, heading straight for our boy. But of course, it wasn't going to be that easy, right? And the golem grabs that thing again. Even so, the terrifying beast didn't give up, and charging at one of the golems, it manages to throw it far away. The protagonist is surprised by that. And meanwhile, that thing was looking at some ores. I don't know how, but the monster absorbed all of them, and somehow it managed to evolve. As usual, a few minutes later, Samon wonders where that thing came from, because no matter what skill he used, it wasn't causing even a bit of damage. Since there's no other way, he'll have to bring a giant there. But my buddy, because life is never that easy, a giant crystal ends up falling at the cave entrance. That thing simply blocked the exit, and Samon says it's definitely much tougher and smarter than he imagined. But at that very moment, he realizes something. If a monster that size had been wandering around outside, it should have left marks through the forest, assuming it can only live in mines. And if that's the case, then it doesn't make sense to bring the giant there, right? To be honest, things are going to get more complicated, but if he at least knew its weakness, he wouldn't have so much trouble. Then the boy keeps staring at the creature, apparently finding its weakness. At the moment, he's going to need some time. Then he starts walking through the cave looking for something, and at that very moment, he finds a pickaxe made by a dwarf. He says he might have a chance to win with that, and charging at the creature, the guy literally starts mining the stone that was on its head. The scene then returns to the mansion, with everyone wanting to know why the young master disappears every night. And poor Philip says that every time he tries to follow our hero, he always manages to disappear. The residents say he often visits the Demon King's castle, and the soldier says he didn't think twice, since he didn't know the situation. But now that he does, he understands why Hans is so worried. However, the blessed butler appears, saying there's no longer any need to worry. In fact, he decided to trust the protagonist completely, and at this moment he believes that he was doing his utmost for his people. Then the scene returns to the cave, and the kid uses his magic to attack that creature from above. The kid falls on top of his golems, and at that very moment, an explosion happens. Apparently, the big beast was defeated, and the golems, without wasting any time, begin removing the stones that were on the monster's head. And then Samon, looking to the side, comes across a skeleton that apparently belonged to an ancient dwarf. Even the artifacts and all the items were still on his body, thinking that they seemed to have tried to protect the place to safeguard what they built. Anyway, he hopes that was enough, since now he has a place to rest, right? Besides, he hoped he would understand that even if he took all his things, that doesn't mean he has bad intentions. The scene then shifts to the mansion, with the guy with glasses reading the protagonist's message saying he had found a mine. That place is full of ore, and most importantly, there are no signs of monsters. And after hearing all that, the mage says he thinks they need to prepare equipment to dig the tunnels. However, Hans says that won't be necessary, because the tunnels were so well preserved that it's as if someone had been working on them. With the right workforce, they could definitely generate significant profits. Meanwhile, Samon was listening to all of that in silence, thinking that the foundation of the territory was steadily taking shape, little by little. Basically, he moved the monsters into the mountain range to prepare for any unforeseen territorial wars. And if necessary, when the territory's forces are not enough, those things will definitely serve as backup. Right after that, Hans calls out to the protagonist, saying that all of this is thanks to him. However, the kid says that all he did was finish what all of them had been doing. If they don't want to live like before, they can't let their guard down and lose themselves. Even the slightest lapse in focus will definitely leave them all behind. Changing the subject, he has a request to make, asking if he can be trusted to manage the territory while he's away. The butler asks where he was going, and the boy says to get the details from Phillips, who says that, basically, the young lord has decided to buy a giant. And right then, the captain of the knight's fleet appears, saying not to worry, because he'll make sure no problems arise while accompanying him. They start arguing right there over who will accompany the boy. And a little later, our boy was already traveling. Phillips was all excited, saying that owning a giant is an unbelievable dream. The boy says there are already giants in the territory, but Phillips says a new giant model is on a completely different level from those. Anyway, a true pilot is only complete when he pilots one of those, and then the soldier tells him to stop that nonsense. He shouldn't even think about fooling around while traveling with him, telling him to shut up once and for all. And watching the situation, Samon thinks it was a good idea to bring Rogers, since he's perfect for keeping Phillips in line. And then, my friend, at that very moment, a locomotive literally appears. No one understood a damn thing. A short while later, Rogers was getting down from that machine, Seimin asks what that was, and the soldier says it's a kind of carriage powered by magical energy. It's unbelievably expensive and much stronger than a carriage normally used to transport heavy and large loads. And at the same time, someone appears there asking if they're all right. And judging by their expressions, it was probably the first time they had seen a locomotive like that. Rogers asks who they are, and the guy completely casually says they're merchants from a trading company called Shade and travel through rural territories buying local specialties. Our hero says he's never heard of them, and the guy says of course, since they only started recently. Changing the subject, he looks strangely familiar, asking if he happens to be the lord of some noble family. The protagonist asks why he suddenly wants to know that, since he's never seen him before, and he, making up an excuse, says that merchants are always salesmen, so they try to build relationships with lords like him. That said, he's probably a lord from a promising family. However, the kid says he's not exactly very well known. Then the merchant's expression instantly changes, and he says he's gotten so used to sales talk that maybe he was too direct. And Seimon, ignoring the guy, says they're very busy, so they'll continue on their way. Everyone leaves as if nothing happened, and the guy kept staring at a piece of paper saying that he thought he'd have to go all the way to the Lacan family's estate to find him, but never imagined he'd run into him there. And on that list, man, I can tell this won't end well. Our boy is the only one without an ex. The scene then shifts to another place, and Philip says the people they met earlier even seemed like mercenaries. Rogers says he thought so too, and there's no way a group of merchants who just started would have something like that. More specifically, that man is very suspicious, and the people behind him didn't look like merchants either. Our boy just listens to the conversation in silence, thinking that isn't all, because there was something loaded on that machine that had a faint flow of mana. He seems to know what was inside, and at that very moment, someone starts walking toward them. Right away, the soldiers start getting alert, and you already know, my friend. It was that merchant from earlier who, acting completely calm, says it's a coincidence to have run into them again. Seimon says he seemed to be heading in the opposite direction from them, so he wants to know why he's there. He says he had some unfinished business to take care of, and on the way back, they ended up seeing the light from this campfire, asking if they could join them. Our hero, unbelievably enough, accepts the proposal, asking if it's all fine with the others too. And deeper into the forest, the guy literally had a bunch of assassins. Then the merchant says he underestimated him as a rookie, but he's still the lord of a territory after all. He's definitely very perceptive, and at that very moment, all the assassins appear. The guy says he holds no personal grudge, but this is still his job, ordering the assassins to finish off every last one of them. Phillips tells the protagonist to stay close to them, and observing the situation, Salmon thinks he has a lot of enemies, and this is far too big to be just a mere assassination. Besides, their skills are no joke, because they're even managing to hold their own in battle while fighting Phillips and Rogers, and if this turns into a prolonged fight, they'll definitely be at a disadvantage. At that very moment, an assassin was about to strike the protagonist, but of course Rogers wasn't going to allow that. Even so, the assassin managed to block his blow, and the soldier asks if our hero was okay. He thinks these guys aren't mere assassins or bandits, and that, without a doubt, every one of them is a highly trained knight. The fake merchant continues to observe the situation, and raising his hand instantly, a shadow appears above the two soldiers. Man, a massive giant appears, and the merchant says it would be wise for them to surrender now. Right away, Seimon thinks that was the energy he had sensed before, and having no other choice, he tells Phillips and Rogers to close their eyes immediately. The two do as the boy asked, and right after that, the kid unleashes his dark magic. After delivering the blow, a huge explosion erupts there, and nobody can see anything. Then an opportunity appears for the group to escape, and of course they were going to take it. The merchant, still affected, tells everyone to pull themselves together, and one of the assassins says they were never told the target could use magic. The scene then shifts to the group that had already escaped. Everyone was surprised that the protagonist had managed to handle everything in a situation like that. Who would have thought he had so much talent for magic? And Phillips says that he is, without a doubt, a one-of-a-kind knight. But the kid doesn't want to hear it, saying that if they have the energy to keep yapping, they need to run faster. Thinking it was lucky they had camped in the forest, because if it had been out on the plains, they definitely would have already been caught. Since it's nighttime, it'll be hard for them to track them, so they need to put as much distance as possible between them right now. But my friend, that didn't last long. And right then, the gang of assassins appears. They manage to catch up to our protagonist, who is surprised to be getting overtaken like this. But Rogers tells him to keep running, and Phillips says these guys don't even have half the numbers they had before. The protagonist asks if they'll be okay, and the kid tells him to trust them, because they haven't even shown their true abilities yet. And with that settled, there was no other choice, right? And Seimon says he'll leave the rest to them. Then, my friend, the real chaos is about to start now. And at that very moment, Phillips charges at the assassin with his aura, saying that from here on out, he'll show what he's really capable of. Meanwhile, Rogers was still furious that they had tried to hurt the protagonist, and the guy charges at the soldiers, fueled by nothing but rage, and since they pointed their swords at House Lacan, they'd better be ready to pay the price. The scene then shifts to a city which was completely engulfed in flames, and Reina was watching it all from afar. The old man says she must leave there immediately, but the girl, being as kind as she is, says she can't abandon the people and flee on her own. But the townspeople say they'll be fine, and having no other choice, the old man takes the girl's hand, saying that for the sake of the people she needs to go. Then time passes once more, and the city was consumed by flames. Some people sadly weren't fortunate enough to make it out alive, and the girl, seeing all that, can only apologize. At that very moment, someone appears saying it's been a long time since he last saw the princess. The one there was the count, who says that lately they've been focusing on disciplining the soldiers. That's why they've been conducting nighttime training to ensure the citizens' safety at night. Then the old man already knows, of course, what had happened. But there's nothing he can do about it, right? The count says he had already told the princess before, saying that the one making things difficult for her people is, in fact, her. Either way, she'll live in despair and regret for the rest of her life. Man, this guy is a piece of shit. And hearing all that, the girl thinks that she definitely would never forgive him. Thus, the scene returns to the forest, with Saemon realizing that no one is following him anymore, and he still doesn't know who is behind the enemy. And they even have the power to mobilize a giant. In any case, he may have to return to the territory and prepare for war. But at that very moment, our boy notices something. And in front of him, there were two giants, along with a considerable number of assassins. The merchant says he underestimated him, asking if they should consider this a draw. But who would have thought the heir of a hero's family would resort to such insignificant magic? The protagonist asks if he didn't like his magic. But even if that were the case, going this far just to capture a mere teenager was kind of insane. Hearing that, the merchant merely smiles, saying that it's interesting to give it your all, even when hunting a rabbit. And hearing that, the protagonist immediately starts laughing, saying that they separated him from his escort knights and thought they had still cornered him. Hearing that, the guy is surprised, wondering if Saemon was still so calm even in a situation like this, wondering whether he had already given up or even gone mad. If you're trying to buy time, it's useless. And Saemon, summoning his magic, says that none of them will survive. A huge magic circle appears and you already know what's going to happen now, right, my friend? The merchant just watches everything in silence, and now the real mess is about to begin. Like this, a whole bunch of golems appear and no one understood what was happening. Then he says, "All right, I get it," and heads on. Off. Even so, the merchant tells them to stay calm, saying that golems were only threatening in the past, and they mustn't forget that they still have two giants. Even dozens of golems would be no match for them. Declaring that whoever brings him the young master's head will be named the next knight commander. Hearing that, of course, the assassins get fired up, and without wasting any time, they all charge at our boy. He says they'll find out whether, after 500 years, his golems are really useless. He uses his puppet skill, beginning to control all the golems at once. The assassins are shocked by that speed, and the merchant, furious, says those are just mere golems. And Saemon says that if they keep underestimating them like that, they'll only regret it after they're dead. Every movement our boy made, the golems copied, and after that creature punched the ground, no one understood anything. Some even assumed he wasn't able to control those things properly. However, Saemon says he'll give them a piece of advice, stating that understanding the battlefield is the basis of any strategy. At that moment, the merchant understands what was happening, and out of nowhere, the ground starts collapsing. The assassins fall in freefall, and Saemon says he had already warned them before. He attacks everyone with his golem, and everyone gets sent flying. Nothing was left, not even of the giant, and with everything settled, Saemon says he should have at least kept someone alive to find out who was behind this. But completely out of nowhere, our boy is attacked, and unbelievably, it actually works. That merchant was still alive, with one giant saying he'll never forgive him for destroying his knights. But Saemon says this situation might actually be favorable, since he'll capture him and make him confess everything, right? The guy tells him to try if he can, and immediately charges at the boy with a knife. Sebrick then tries to summon his dark magic. However, unbelievably, his mana was getting out of control. That damn curse only gets in the way. And taking advantage of the situation, the merchant goes all out against him. Even so, of course, our boy hasn't given up, right? And placing his hand on the ground, he asks if he really thinks he wouldn't be able to deal with him. The kid wasn't messing around, and out of nowhere, several tentacles come out of the ground. Only now does the merchant realize that was dark magic, and it's impossible for a hero's descendant to be using something like that. Saemon just watches everything and says that before his patience runs out, he'd better say who his master is. And having no other choice, the guy says he'll tell everything, since it was that easy. The one behind it was the count begging for mercy. But my friend, of course he wasn't getting any this time, right? And Saemon, without hesitation, finishes off the merchant. With everything settled, the protagonist says that whether human or demon, the feeling of absorbing power is still unpleasant. He begins to reflect on all of the count's actions so far, wondering if there might be another reason they had targeted the Lacan family. Either way, he would make them regret it. And at that very moment, someone appears in the bushes. It was Phillips. And Saemon says they arrived faster than he thought. Either way, they should leave quickly. And sometime later, Roger says the Duke is probably behind this. Anyway, the protagonist should return to the territory to reinforce the troops even more, because there's no guarantee something similar won't happen again. However, Saemon says that after suffering so much damage, the enemy won't move easily, and now is the best time to secure a giant. Roger says they can't get there without a carriage, but the kid says of course they have one, right? A short time later, the three of them were already inside that locomotive, and Phillips was happy that everything had ended without any incident. And observing the situation, Saemon thinks he had almost been killed because of the curse. The power that stopped the black circle in his heart was definitely because of the curse, and even recovering the power to contain it, it still seems insufficient. He wanted to know who in the world could cast such a curse, and the scene shifts elsewhere. The other merchant from before was trembling like a leaf. He was standing before a hooded man who asks if his name is Duren. The little mustached man says that's exactly right, asking why he had called for him. He asks whether he remembers the directive to secure the Demon King's fortress. He says his guild was almost successful, but an idiot had interfered. And hearing that, the guy didn't seem very pleased, asking if he knows the identity of the one responsible. Right away, Darren starts panicking, saying that this time he'll definitely succeed. However, the man says he never said he was going to kill him. Right now, he's merely curious, asking who that person is that's getting in the way of his plan. A little later, the scene finally shifts to a city called Brandon. Samon says that this city seems much busier than when he was in Lammer, and Roger says that this city is famous throughout the continent for its many magic towers. Thanks to that, the streets are packed with mages, mechanics, and even technicians who stay there. They end up becoming the driving force behind the development of the entire city. And to sum it up, it's the best possible place to buy a giant. Samon says he's building up so much anticipation that now he's actually excited about it. And Philip says there's no need to look anywhere else, because that city even has a branch of the magic tower. Most of the giants recognized across the continent were made by them. And hearing that, our boy is surprised, wondering if there really is a branch there. A flashback appears in his mind, and those people there were the ones who did that to his wife, right? They've grown so much in 500 years that they even built a branch there. And he's going to take this opportunity to clearly see their true nature. Giving them money is unpleasant, but if the performance is good, he'll have to buy the giants, right? After that, he'll dismantle it and find its strength and weaknesses, creating something even better. A few minutes later, a soldier says that this place isn't open to just anyone, and only those with the rank of Baron or higher may enter. Hearing that, Samo says that's very rude, asking if he's judging him without confirming his status. And Philip says that is Luke, heir to the barony, Lacon, demanding that they show respect immediately. But right then, the soldier laughs, asking if this isn't the family famous for being poor, and they don't even have the money to buy a giant, much less repair one. At that moment, the two soldiers start getting heated, but Samon tells them not to mind them, because there's no need to bother with that kind of person, thinking that even after 500 years, they're still rotten. In any case, the scale is much bigger than he thought, and it's on a completely different level from the magic towers he's seen so far. Assuming that the giants from this workshop must come out in impressive quality and quantity. At that, Samon says their disgusting attitude remains the same. And as he starts to leave, he says that for people who threw away basic manners, there's no need at all for him to spend money there. A little while later, Rogers was furious, apologizing for his lack of commitment. Samon says that if the guards are like that, the inside of the tower must be much worse, and for now they should look for another magic tower. Thinking that he'll let it slide for now, since buying a giant is the priority. However, my friend, once everything is done, he'll make sure to get proper revenge. The scene then shifts elsewhere, with Rogers saying that this is one of the top 10 magic towers, and he heard that no other place can match its production speed. Our boy keeps analyzing those giants, and soon after, the attendant appears, asking what brings them to the magic tower. His name is Garrett, asking if they're looking for any giant in particular. The protagonist says he's looking for one in the 30,000 peso range, and then the guy hands the protagonist a huge book. He thinks the guidance and explanations are detailed and incredibly well organized. Above all, even the service was impressive, and unlike the Veritas Tower, they don't judge by appearance or status and even seem to care about their customers. Apparently, not all 10 magic towers are complete trash, and if the performance is good, he'll definitely buy here. Right? Meanwhile, on the other side, a customer was nervous because the magic tower couldn't repair his giant. When he bought it there, he had clearly received one with a durability defect, and as soon as the giant struck something, it crumpled like an old can. And hearing that, our hero immediately changes his mind, saying they don't need to waste any more time there. Yeah, things aren't easy for anyone. They literally can't find a single decent place. The options just keep shrinking, and no magic tower satisfied our boy's desires. He says that they claim this city specializes in giant production, but it's a complete mess. Rogers says that in the past, when the Empire had strict controls, only high-level giants were made, but now, as long as you have money, that's already enough, which means the quality has dropped a lot. Meanwhile, two people were talking, and Glasses Guy says that this is a truly innovative giant. However, the guy in the hat didn't seem to care much about that. Philip says there are even people wandering around begging with blueprints in hand, and that explains why the quality of giants has dropped so much. Samon, meanwhile, takes a look at those papers, and staring at the kid says that this design is quite interesting. It designs the giant structure based on golem theory and can be considered old-fashioned, but even so, it's not bad. Wondering if it's thanks to Muti's teachings that he could now truly appreciate giants. Soon after, the boy asks him to say how much investment he needs, and he gets completely excited by that, saying he'll need about 10,000 pesos. And looking at that man, our boy, the only thing he can do is remember his past self, then says to take him to his laboratory. A little while later, Rogers says that since he said he was out of money, he thought he wouldn't have the space and equipment to produce giants. But apparently I was wrong, because he at least has his own magic tower. The boy says that the previous giant model sold well enough to keep this place running, but the new model takes a lot of time and money to make. That's why most people left and only a few of them remained. Entering the tower, the young man says they must have had a hard time getting there, but there's no need to rush, and they can look around as much as they want. At that very moment, our boy is surprised, starting to stare at that giant, and the boy asks if he knows Sting, and Samon says he had seen him once before, thinking that this guy definitely has some kind of ability. The boy says that the exterior may look similar, But even so, the machine is completely different from the previous one. They applied their latest technology and redesigned it from scratch. Saman asks how long it will take for it to be ready, and the guy says the hardest work is already done, and all that's left are the final adjustments. It'll probably take around 1 to 2 months, and since they're short on staff, it could take even longer. And the protagonist says that if that's the case, he'll invest double, asking them to hire more technicians and finish it in a week. And right then, my man, the guy gets totally hyped, and going through a door, he starts telling the whole tower that they could begin working. Besides that, also they would be getting much better pay this time. The people there weren't doing very well, and the boy says the giant's progress had stopped at approximately 67%. But, my man, they're not going to waste another second. And Phillips, looking at all those people, asks the protagonist if he's sure he wants to see all of this through. But he says not to worry, because he knows very well what research-obsessed mages are like. Anyway, he's eager to see the moment when this place rises up to join the 10 best magic towers there. The night finally arrives and everyone was asleep. However, the protagonist was in the city, saying that now that he had gotten what he wanted, it was time to begin his revenge. The scene then shifts to that magic tower from earlier, and the soldiers were standing guard at night. They hear a noise in the bushes and head toward them, asking who was there. However, little did they know that Simon had already managed to get through the door. He enters the place while wondering what he should do first. A short time later, looking down from a window, there were a lot of people gathered. He uses his dark magic ability, slipping into the place stealthily, thinking that, for a tower's security, this place is surprisingly lax. But wandering around a place like this won't get him anywhere, and he has to find a useful mage somehow. Meanwhile, a hooded guy was looking around. The guy was nervous about something, and shortly after, he was thrilled to have finally entered the magic tower. The security is much weaker than he thought, and now he just needs to get the mage's secret files. With that, maybe he can become a master too. And Saman, watching everything from the sidelines, says that no matter where he went, there was always an idiot like that. With that, the guy keeps going deeper and deeper into the mage's tower, trying to open one of the doors. At that very moment, someone appears there saying he doesn't remember granting entry permission, which means he's probably an intruder. In other words, he has every right to kill him right now. Yeah, the guy literally wasn't messing around. And the young man, hearing all that, says he took the wrong way, asking him to forgive him this time. After that, unbelievably, the mage says he thought he was a thief. By coincidence, he's carrying a very important scroll right now, and since it's extremely secret, it absolutely cannot be leaked. In other words, he hoped he understood how sensitive the security was. Even so, all of that is pretty heavy for him, and since he's also a colleague from the tower, he must know about the new hero-level giant. They keep talking there about that so-called giant, and the guy thinks that just from a quick glance at it, you can already tell it's an incredible masterpiece. But my man, all of that was that mage's plan, who says to understand that the rule was to eliminate anyone unqualified who saw the scroll. The guy doesn't understand anything, saying that he was the one who showed it to him. But the man says he doesn't know what he's talking about. After all, he had seen it on his own. And then you already know what's going to happen, right? The guy kicked the bucket. The mage didn't seem to feel any remorse, saying that if he had stayed in his place, he would have avoided this. At that very moment, the protagonist appears, saying that the guy had shown confidential information just to justify that man's death. And as expected, whether in the past or the present, there is no one in the Veritas Magic Tower who is just. The scene then shifts to that guy again in his office, saying that the last hero-grade giant is taking longer to analyze than he thought. Apparently, his plans are going to be delayed even more. And at that very moment, the man notices something, saying that he knows very well that there's someone else there. Our boy finally appears, saying that he is probably the head of the Veritas Magic Tower. Without wasting any time, the guy immediately summons his magic and asks what his objective is. And Saman says it has been exactly the same for 500 years, which is basically to rid the world of trash like him. At that very moment, an explosion happens, and the guy asks if he really just called the head of Veritas Academy trash. His group is far beyond his reach, and if he keeps talking so irresponsibly, he'll never see the light of day again. However, at that same moment, our boy grabs the guy, saying that he really hasn't changed at all, even after 500 years. They still think they're special and don't even consider others as people, but starting today, that illusion will come to an end, and the very word Veritas will be completely erased from history. And a few minutes later, the protagonist says he heard that Iron Mages avoid fighting, but he didn't expect a Sixth Circle chief to be such a coward. Anyway, since he's there, he should take the spoils, and looking at the blueprint of a giant, he says there are only a few of those blueprints on the entire continent. That one is the so-called hero giant blueprint, and he'll definitely make good use of it. And seeing that thing destroy Veritas's magic tower will be a very interesting spectacle. Just taking one of those giants from the magic tower and Veritas is already a huge loss for them. But even so, it's still not enough to satisfy him, and the guy literally starts setting the office on fire. A short time later, the scene shifts back to that locomotive, with Saman thinking that all the family's central secrets must have turned to ashes. Revenge was only his goal, yet he gained much more than he expected. Right after that, Phillips appears, asking if something happened. He seems much happier than when he received the giant, and Saman says he's just happy to be returning to his territory, thinking that they achieved more than they aimed for, and that as soon as they return, he can focus on recovering his mana circle. At that very moment, the boy notices something, seeing that the one there in his territory was literally Princess Reina. And shortly after, the girl says that she wanted their help taking care of the refugees. Right after that, the protagonist appears asking what she was doing there. At that moment, the girl realizes who it was, and shortly after, Simon asks if something happened. She says that after he left the city, she thought the Count's tyranny would lessen, but he became even more aggressive and unreasonable. And instead of keeping his promise, he doubled the refugees' taxes and kept tormenting them. On top of that, he even set their homes on fire, injuring and killing many people. So they decided they could no longer stay in that place, and because of that, decided to seek help from a certain Marquise Myers, one of the 3 noble leaders. However, he still hasn't agreed to receive them. The old man says they've been in this situation for 3 days, and as he can see, they're being completely ignored. And since she can't give up, she kept praying at the castle gate. Hearing all that, the protagonist says it's really irritating, and above all, waiting for a god who doesn't answer, asking her to think carefully. Because from the Marquis' point of view, he doesn't have the slightest reason to agree to help them. He would have to accommodate tens of thousands of refugees, and considering the territorial war, it would be an enormous risk, asking what kind of idiot would accept such a request. The girl asks if he thinks she's doing something useless, and Simon says that's exactly it, and that, after everything that happened in Lammer, she still hasn't learned anything, stating that to protect something you definitely need power because without it you can't do anything, thinking that, even knowing she isn't his wife, when he sees her he still can't forget her. That's why he can't help but care, right? Saying that, for now they'll return to the territory because he'll listen to her properly there. However, Reina says she can't do that and won't leave until she meets the Marquis. Hearing that, of course the boy gets pissed, asking if she's really going to keep doing all this. She needs to face reality once and for all, and trying to take care of dozens of helpless refugees obviously means problems will keep happening. Right now, she should be more worried about herself than the refugees. Then she says there's no way to know how long it would take if she ended up focusing on herself to gain power and protect the refugees. And if the people end up dying during that time, it would make no sense, asking if he thinks her life is worth more than the refugees. Simon answers without thinking that obviously it is, but she says every life is equally precious, and those people believe in her despite all the hardships. For that reason, she can never abandon them, and she has to find a way to do everything for them. With that, the kid is reminded more and more of his wife, saying that if 500 years ago someone like her had been by his side, maybe things would have been a little different. The reason he wanted to change the world wasn't just revenge, but he had forgotten that for a long time. Thanks to her, he had remembered one of the reasons, and hearing that, the girl wasn't understanding a damn thing. Then Simon says he wanted to offer his strength to her as well, stating that the Lacan family will stand by her side, and shortly after going to Veritas's magic tower, apparently they were under attack. At that moment, a hooded guy appears saying that the defenses of that place are truly disappointing. The guy was completely surrounded by soldiers, and at that very moment, one of them is startled, recognizing that symbol on his back. Then all the soldiers drop their swords, saying they salute the 7th elder of the magic tower of Veritas. That guy there is called Piero, and he asks where the branch leader is. The soldier says he'll guide him there, and Piero asks if he's the one responsible for the security of that place. The young man says that's exactly right, and Piero says that if that's the case, there's no need for a guide. After all, being escorted by someone incompetent is disgusting. The young man took the guy down with the greatest ease. Everyone just watches in silence, and the guy says that in the magic tower of Veritas, trash is unnecessary. At that very moment, a flashback appears with a boy drowning. The protagonist and his wife watch all of that from afar, saying he's going to get help from the nearest village. But Katerina says that by then it'll be too late. And with no other choice, the girl literally jumps into the water in the middle of that rain. A few minutes later, she had already rescued the boy, and he, unbelievably, was still alive. The girl is happy that everything worked out, and Simon, furious, asks why she did something so reckless. She says that she was scared at the time too, but saving a life sometimes requires a kind of reckless courage. And back in the present, Simon thinks that he thought they only looked alike, but she's just as responsible as her. At that very moment, Phillips asks what was going on, because he heard that he was accepting refugees from the kingdom of Volga, wanting to know if he's planning to go to war with the monarch Count. And with no other choice, Rogers says he agrees with Phillips too. At this rate, a war with the Count is inevitable, and even though the situation in his territory has improved a little, they aren't ready for a war. They keep arguing there, and the protagonist starts getting really pissed off, saying not to interfere because he's going to handle all of it. A short while later, everyone was gathered in a hall, and Simon asks if he said the number of refugees is around 30,000. If that many people start moving, they'll certainly draw attention and be pursued immediately as soon as this mess begins. If they went by sea, they would quickly reach Lacan territory, but since it's the dry season, they can't set sail. Besides, the land route is far too long, and if they're pursued, they'll definitely be caught, which means there's only one way. They're basically going to travel by river. The old man says they already said they can't sail, and Simon says they'll use that to their advantage, since they'll have a little time to prepare. Basically, they're going to build rafts, and since the water is too shallow for ships, rafts can float just fine, so they'll make them big enough to carry a lot of people. Hearing that, Phillips says it might be a good idea. However, Rogers disagrees, saying that such a huge raft will be very slow. If they end up being pursued, they'll be easy to catch, and if they're attacked from afar, they won't be able to counterattack. However, our boy says not to worry because he had already considered that, and for that reason, they're going to use the locomotive. And with that thing's mobility, they'll definitely be able to escape any adversity. The two are surprised by that method. But my friend, life isn't easy. And the old man says that unfortunately, they don't have enough resources to build huge rafts. The kid had thought of that too, saying they still have the money left over from buying the giants. Besides that, as soon as they return to the territory, he'll send another 30,000 pesos to help them. And hearing all that, Reina apologizes, saying she knows very well how difficult it is to accept all those refugees. The Locken family will definitely suffer great losses. However, the protagonist tells her not to worry, because they'll definitely win, but they can't act directly in this operation, and its success depends on them managing to reach the river safely, asking if he can trust her to lead her people well. And so, with everything settled, the scene shifts elsewhere, and that guy from the Mage Tower was still alive. I thought he had already been killed. At that very moment, someone appears in the room saying that he's in a deplorable state. It was Piro, who says that if the master is like this, it's no surprise his subordinates were idiots too. And seeing who it was, the guy asks what the Great Elder was doing there. Since he has nothing left to lose, he can do whatever he wants. And Piro says it's only natural that he should face punishment. But before anything else, there's something he wants to ask, questioning what he did with Project Atlas. At that moment, the young man is surprised and asks how he knows about that. And the hooded man says he had known for a long time that he stole it, but was watching to see if he had any more allies. However, since he seems to act alone, he isn't sure what his objective is. But the guy notices something is wrong and asks who he is. He had known all the Elders of Veritas, and each one possessed vast and unique magical powers. But even so, he had never felt such a sinister energy. At that moment, the guy smiles, saying they said he was a genius who rivaled Albert before that incident, and apparently it wasn't a lie. So then, my friend, it's obvious nothing good is going to come of this. And the guy is attacked again. Who knows what that dude was doing? And right then, he pulls something out of the poor guy's head. At that very moment, the guy drops unconscious, and Piro says that if he doesn't want to talk, he'll just see it for himself. Wanting to know where Project Atlas is, he starts analyzing the man's memories, becoming surprised to find an intruder who used dark magic. Things really are getting complicated, mentioning that since the Demon King's death 500 years ago, there has only been one place where dark mages exist, besides himself, which would be the so-called Volga Republic. Honestly, I didn't expect those people to be behind this. The Volga Republic was founded after the fall of the Volga monarchy, and the fact that the Dark Elf is ruling that republic is still unknown. Her race was oppressed by humans for a long time, and he suspected they might be plotting something, but they acted much faster than he expected. Right now, their power is weak, but if they study dark magic and grow stronger, they could become a force capable of rivaling the Baroque Empire. However, now still isn't the time, because the Republic needs more time to grow. If they create a hero-class giant, the Empire will definitely intervene, and they could end up being annihilated. Anyway, there's no choice but to recover the project. And while holding some green thing, he literally puts it into the poor guy's ear. At that very moment, the dude starts getting back up. And man, the guy really didn't look too good. He even looked like a zombie. Right away, he kneels, and Piro says he planted a worm just in case. Anyway, they should get started on their plan soon, right? The scene then shifts back to the Locken mansion, and Hans couldn't believe that the Count had really tried to assassinate the protagonist. The previous giant incident may have been their doing as well. And Rogers says they're probably preparing for a territorial war. Everyone keeps discussing it there, and the guy with glasses asks whether it's really okay to take in refugees in a situation like this, because they already have little money just to manage the land. It would take an enormous amount of money to feed thousands of people, and at that very moment, suddenly, there was a noise. Without wasting time, everyone heads outside to see what was happening, and the one there was the protagonist. Phillips asks where he had been all this time, and behind him, man, there was a whole lot of money. The kid casually says that those are the Demon King's secret war funds, and while inspecting the castle, he found them beneath a secret wing. Rogers asks if it's really okay to use that, because it might be cursed by the Demon King. But my guy, of course the glasses guy, wasn't going to let that slide, saying they should overcome the curse with pure willpower. This now belongs to the Visconti of Lacan, and even if the Demon King came back, they definitely wouldn't return it. Meanwhile, Simon thinks that it was an emergency fund secretly accumulated using golems and monsters, and since they're going to take in refugees, there's no choice but to use it, right? Anyway, now the financial problem is solved, asking if Rogers has a moment, because there's something he'd like his help with. The scene then shifts somewhere else, with Simon thinking that learning the magic that has advanced in the 500 years since his death is urgent. But if there's a situation where that power can't be used, that would be bad, and that's why he needs a way to deal with it. Next, Rogers says he was worried because the protagonist hadn't trained with the sword since that damn incident, but he's surprised that he asked for a duel first. And then the kid says it would be shameful if the heir of a warrior family couldn't wield a sword. At that very moment, the kid charges at the captain of the knights, who after blocking the strike says he was worried, since it had been a long time since he had handled a sword, but his concern had been unnecessary. His movements are still better than before, and he has definitely grown stronger. And more importantly, he's now reading his opponent's movements. It's what you'd expect from a descendant of the Lacan family, and he must have definitely continued his training in secret. However, it's still clear that it's not enough, right? mentioning that in this situation, it's better for him to let the attack flow and then land a counterattack, turning the whole situation around. The two keep fighting there, and Seiman thinks that he believed his past experience with countless knights would let him keep up to a certain extent. But this difference in level is already absurd. At that, Roger says he's impressed by how much he has improved and his growth is truly frightening. At this rate, he might even be able to defeat the Demon King from 500 years ago, and just like the hero Lacan, and hearing that, of course, the protagonist gets pissed off, right? While gripping his sword, he thinks he didn't expect to fight on equal footing. But even so, he needs to land at least one hit, or he won't be able to sleep easy tonight, right? At that moment, he uses a physical enhancement skill, charging at the guy. They continue the training, and at that very moment, Seiman is surprised by something. The guy starts glowing yellow, and Roger says he never expected him to be able to move that fast, asking if he had been holding back against him before, and Seiman immediately realizes that was the hero Lacan's sword aura. A golden sword aura is a transcendental level that no one can imitate, and obviously there was no way he could forget it, right? After all, he had been killed by that ability 500 years ago. Even though centuries have passed, it seems that for him all of this happened in just a single year. And placing his hand on his neck, he tells Rogers not to hold back, or else he'll regret it. And the young man, seeing that the protagonist was using aura, is surprised. She is weak, but even so, it is definitely one of the abilities. Then, without wasting any time, he tries to land a blow. And so the battle continues. A short while later, Rogers says they can end today's training. The boy says he can keep going, but Rogers says he's already done enough, and pushing too hard isn't good. Anyway, he says he's surprised, asking since when he has been able to use aura. He had never taught him that, but he used it with great ease, and hearing that, Seiman wonders if he had unconsciously released demonic energy. Next, Rogers says that as expected, he can't hide the blood of the Lacan family. However, Seiman realizes that something is strange, saying that aura is the physical manifestation of mana, and simply coating a sword with demonic energy shouldn't just turn it into aura. Thinking that the assassin he met before used aura too. Soon after, the soldier says that seeing how quickly he is improving, it seems like the right time, and starting tomorrow, he will teach him the golden sword skill. Hearing that, our boy is surprised, wondering if that skill that had defeated him in the past could become his. But there's something wrong, asking if that skill wasn't supposed to be passed down only to a single successor. Besides, he learned the skill even without being the head of the family. And Roger says it seems he forgot that part too. He knows very well that the Demon King's curse caused the previous heads of the family to have short lives, and fearing that the secret swordsmanship skill would be lost, his ancestor passed it down through the most trusted knight commanders. Thanks to that, the knight commanders will protect Lacan's legacy, and at the same time serve as the family's strong foundation. Hearing that, Seiman thinks that was probably the reason they were able to continue even after all these years, wondering if mastering this sword skill could make him as strong as the old warrior Lacan. However, since life isn't easy, the guy says it would be difficult because the second half of the skill contains the supreme sword techniques that were lost 400 years ago. However, just by mastering the first half, one can already reach the level of a sword master. Observing the situation, Seiman thinks he never imagined that one day he would face the skill that took his life in that way. But since Lacan is already dead, the golden sword is just another technique to learn. And with no other choice, of course he's going to learn it. Thus, time passes, and there were a lot of people gathered in a square. A little child was looking up, saying that the princess had arrived, thanking everyone for gathering there. It has already been more than 10 years since they left the kingdom of Volga and came to the monarch's territory. During that time, they suffered endless discrimination and persecution. Because of the lord's oppression and tyranny, many of them have suffered. Instead of protecting them, she couldn't even voice their complaints, and they have harbored resentment over her authority while watching everything from afar. However, they cannot remain trapped in this situation, and today, they will definitely leave this place and go to Lacan's territory. She made that decision on her own and believes that this path will open a better future for everyone. She understands very well that their fears were that the past might repeat itself, and she cannot force this decision on those who are already wounded. Even so, she wanted them to trust her and follow her one more time. They will begin a new chapter together, asking them to join her once again. The girl, despite being a princess, unbelievably bows, and then everyone agrees with her, saying they wouldn't follow just anyone blindly. He knows better than anyone the hardships and sacrifices she went through for them, and if it's her decision, then it will surely be the best choice. Thus, everything was settled, and the guy with glasses asks if he hadn't already told her that they had chosen to follow her of their own free will, and because of that, she doesn't need to worry. Right? And hearing all that, the girl says she is deeply grateful. At that moment, the guy says they just received a message from Lord Luke stating that all the transport is already prepared. Until now, the Count hasn't noticed their movements, but even so, he wants to know if they can really move that many people at once without being detected. Soon after, that old man appears, telling them not to worry, and holding a box with a bunch of masks. He says he had already taken care of everything. Thus, time passes, and a man looking down from above asks what was going on. The refugee camp is completely empty, and he says he told the soldiers to keep an eye on them, asking why they removed all of them. The man says he had no choice because of the plague outbreak in the sewers, and the guy holding a mask asks if he means this. That is just a mask that imitates a plague, and it's really pathetic for a guy like him to have fallen for a trick like that. And seeing all that, the Count, furious, wouldn't stop talking about Princess Reina. After all the generosity he showed, she would betray him like this, and if she gets caught, she definitely won't be forgiven, right? At that very moment, a group of people appear greeting the Count. It was a group called the Scorpion Cavalry, announcing that they had returned from the battlefield and were getting back up. The Count, with a smile, says this is the perfect moment because he has something he needs them to take care of. Apparently, the heavens are on his side, and Princess Reina will deeply regret running away from his side. Man, this guy is not normal. A short while later, all the refugees were being transported, and there were even children there. The poor little guy says he can't walk anymore, and the hooded man tells Victor that the people's endurance has reached its limit, suggesting they rest for a bit. At that very moment, Reina appears saying they should do what the man asked because making sure everyone arrives safely and without injuries is what matters most. A few minutes later, the refugees were eating, and Victor tells the girl to stop standing watch and leave the rest to them, so she can eat something. If she collapses, the people will fall into even greater despair. And Reina says that everyone is suffering like this because of her failures. If she had been stronger, it wouldn't have come to this. And Victor tells her not to say that. After all, she is the pillar of their strength, and it was because she is who she is that everyone followed her there, because they know that no matter what happens, she would never abandon them. And hearing that, the girl simply gives her thanks. At that very moment, everyone hears a noise, and immediately a bunch of refugees start running. Several soldiers appear and begin capturing the refugees. The two of them were watching all of that from afar, and because of that, they end up being surrounded. One of the Scorpion Knights says it's time for the princess to return, asking her to follow him obediently. All of that if she values those people's lives, of course. Victor asks if he has no pride as a knight for doing this, and the soldier says it's ironic to hear that from someone who ran away like a rat in the middle of the night. But the old man says that they were the ones who forced them onto this path. However, the knight says that he was the one who escalated the situation by ignoring the Count's generosity and taking in the helpless refugees. Instead, he chose to be selfish and flee under cover of night, asking if that's how a princess known as a saint behaves. And Victor, furious, asks if he's already forgotten what he did to his people, because he imposed taxes on them higher than those on ordinary citizens and constantly forced them into hard labor, asking if he has any idea how much his people suffered under such discrimination, and yet still dares to spout so much nonsense. But the knight didn't care about that, saying his orders are simple: capture Princess Reina, so she has to make a choice and surrender, and they'll let the people go. Otherwise, they'll all die there together. And hearing all that, the girl asks if they will free the people if she goes back alone. Victor tries to stop her, and the girl simply asks him to answer. And the man says he swears in the name of the Scorpions that they would no longer go after the refugees. At that, the old man says she can't fall for those words. She replies that she is the last ruler of the kingdom of Volga, so she cannot abandon everyone and flee alone without her people. They said that she is the pillar of their strength. However, without her people, she has no reason to exist. And if it's for their sake, she is certainly ready to sacrifice herself, asking Victor to take care of all of them. Everyone watches that in silence, and with no other choice, the girl will have to go alone, right? Thinking that she will accept her fate without any regrets. However, there is one single thing on her mind. She never had the chance to properly thank the protagonist. And right after that, the soldier starts laughing, saying all her effort was for nothing. And now that they have the princess, he can finally deliver the Count's final order, which is simply to kill all of them. Right. At once, the soldiers charge at the citizens, and Reina says that wasn't the deal. But the guy says he never said anything until now, and obviously the guy had been lying the whole time, right? Seeing all that, of course, the old man wasn't going to let that slide, and charges at the soldiers. The guy was really fired up, and then was the captain of the Scorpions going to let that slide too? And attacks the poor old man, saying that he was famous in his youth, but now he's nothing more than a weakling. At that, the man falls to the ground wounded, and the captain of the Scorpions says he wanted to make sure he understood exactly what kind of situation he's in. He raises his sword about to attack the old man again, but at that very moment, a black flame appears. An explosion happens at the same time, and everyone watches without understanding anything. But Reina already knows what it was, right? And the protagonist appears, saying he doesn't know what's going on, but judging by the situation, it doesn't seem like he needs to be gentle with them. Next, Victor says he thought it was all over, thanking Simon for showing up. But then the old man realizes he had literally just said the protagonist's name. And the surprised soldier says he also thought he had seen that face somewhere before, asking if he isn't the young lord of the Lacanvige County. It's no wonder things seem strange, and the princess had stood still the whole time and suddenly ran away at night, so he had the feeling that someone was behind all of this. But in truth, it was just some idiot from a Viscounty practically on the verge of the trash heap. And honestly, he feels sorry for the princess for needing his help. At that very moment, a bunch of soldiers rush our boy, who, raising his hand, says to answer his call. At that very moment, the ground begins to tremble, and Simon says to eliminate all the enemies before them. Right away, my partner, an entire army of golems begins to appear, surrounding all the soldiers. The captain of the Scorpions says he had never seen so many giant golems at once, asking who that brat was. Besides, how had he done that? But my partner, it was already too late to question anything, and the golem charges at him. With that, the fight there was getting ugly, and the captain of the Scorpions tells them not to panic, because they're just golems. Their durability and speed are nothing compared to a giant, and if they use their mobility, they'll have some chance of winning. And our hero, using that puppet skill again, starts controlling the golems. At that very moment, one of the monsters punches the ground, and man, a bunch of rocks start flying toward the soldiers. With that, in a matter of seconds, a large part of the army had already been knocked out, and the captain couldn't believe that was happening. Having no other choice, he gets off his horse, and grabbing the princess tells them to stop or he'll kill her. However, Saemon still hadn't paid that any mind, and charging at the soldier, slams his face literally into a tree. With that, his helmet breaks, and Saemon, grabbing him by the neck, tells him not to remind him of things that irritate him, because he could kill him right now. Incredibly, that guy was still acting tough, asking if he really thought he would get away after doing this. The Count obviously would never let this slide, and Saemon says he had already made it clear that he had warned him. With that, the guy passes on to a better place, and the princess was watching all of that from afar. Calling out to the protagonist, she asks how he got there. He tells her to just gather the refugees and hide for now. Reina keeps staring at the boy who was standing before the remaining soldiers. They were surprised, saying that in a battle without giants, the presence of a mage can decide victory or defeat. However, they had never heard of a mage literally controlling golems, and it's as if he were even the Demon King himself. At that, Saemon says that from the moment they decided to fight him, they should have been prepared to risk their lives. And right after hearing that, all the soldiers dropped their weapons, immediately starting to retreat. But life isn't all sunshine and roses, right? And Saemon obviously wouldn't let them leave, and drawing his sword, declares that all of them will die there. And so time passes, and a few minutes later, all the soldiers were on the ground. The boy stares at the princess, saying they eliminated the enemies there, but they don't know when the pursuers will come, and in any case, he'll take her to where the rafts are. However, right after that, one of the soldiers immediately asks him to stop, stating that they are grateful for his help, but he must not approach the princess, asking what power that was that he had just shown them, since he had never heard of the Lacan family having the ability to control golems. Besides, the magic he used seemed different from ordinary magic, and it was a sinister aura that could even be black magic. Questioning how a noble from a family of knights could have access to such abilities. Observing the situation, Saemon immediately thinks he made a mistake, and because he lost his temper for a moment, he revealed his power to too many people. Honestly, that doesn't suit him, assuming it's probably because of the regrets from his past life. Right after that, the soldier says that no matter how urgent the situation is, they can't ignore this. And Saemon asks if it isn't because of this exact power that they all stayed alive. They keep arguing there, and at that moment, the princess is getting nervous. She tells everyone to stop this mess. The method doesn't matter, and the fact is that he had saved them. Besides, the protagonist would never get involved with black magic. However, incredibly, our boy replies that he doesn't want to lie in this situation. And what did they see? It is actually the power of the black magic of the Demon King Saemon, who died 500 years ago. Well, that was way too easy to reveal, huh? After that, of course, everyone would be shocked, and the soldier asks if the Demon King had been resurrected. However, the boy says that wasn't the case, mentioning that once a crystallization of knowledge that had an essence of power so great unleashed chaos upon the world, and it's simply that his legacy had resurfaced in the world. Due to a curse, he has been weak since childhood, and even while learning his family's swordsmanship, his progress was extremely slow, and whenever he felt frustrated and discouraged, he would visit the Demon King's castle, where his ancestors' achievements still remained. And then one day, by pure luck, he discovered a secret passage left behind by the Demon King. It led into the interior of the castle, and inside it was literally everything the Demon King had built. And although he was afraid to enter an unknown place, that fear quickly disappeared, all after facing what was inside there, of course. And that was the only way to overcome the limits he was born with. From then on, he secretly studied magic and golem control, and the result is the power you witnessed just now. Of course, as the descendant of a hero, using the Demon King's power is something that deserves condemnation. But he had no other choice, since he was desperate. Even so, he needed power in order to protect what is precious to him. Hearing that, the soldier says that even so, this cannot be forgiven. And the old man, getting nervous, says that they're only safe because of the protagonist, and at the very least, they shouldn't judge his position. Looking at our boy, he states that he doesn't care whether he has the Demon King's power or not, and is simply grateful that he protected them, and they will definitely keep this matter quiet. Hearing that, Saemon thanks them for their understanding, thinking that thankfully some accepted it, but it seems that's still not enough to convince everyone, so he'll have to figure something out later, right? Next, Victor says they don't know when the Count's pursuit squad will catch up to them, so they'll have to start moving soon. And a little while later, the furious Count says that losing both the princess and the refugees wasn't enough, but now even the Scorpions had been annihilated. His greatest cavalry unit had been destroyed by nothing more than a ruined Vice-County. Next, the boy says that since even the Dark Knights fell, the nobles are probably supporting them in secret. Moving carelessly without knowing the enemy's true strength is very dangerous. And hearing that, the Count simply tells him to be quiet. He won't let those idiots do whatever they want, ordering a message to be sent to the Emperor. The guy was really furious, saying that he will definitely make him regret it. And meanwhile, in Vidix County Lacan, everyone was gathered around a table. Han says that just now a royal messenger arrived and it was declared that a territorial war between Monarcha County and Lacanvis County had been approved. Rogers says that given the Count's violent nature, this was inevitable sooner or later. But even so, there's one thing he can't understand, which is specifically the justification for the war, which claimed that they attacked the Count's private soldiers. They continue discussing there, and Saemon says that now is not the time to get bogged down in details, and they need to focus on how to overcome this situation, asking what the status of their forces is, and Roger says that they recently recruited mercenaries from among the young men in the refugee camps. The problem is that they have barely had any training and won't be very useful in battle. As for the giants, they tried to buy and repair abandoned ones, but due to time constraints, only 3 of them are operational and ready for battle. Compared to the number of giants in the Count's domain, it's nowhere near enough, and Reyna, raising her hand, says that actually they also have a giant. At that moment, Phillips gets really excited, saying that they saw that giant's capabilities in the arena of giants, and it will definitely be a valuable help. However, they don't have a pilot to command it. But Reyna says they don't need to worry about that either, because Victor has experience piloting a giant. And the old man says that although he is someone who left the battlefield long ago, the experience he accumulated is never forgotten, promising that he won't be a burden and will do his best. With that, some issues were starting to be resolved, and Moody says he doesn't want to ruin the mood, but the situation is not in their favor, because the Count's domain has at least 80 giants as far as they know. Among them, 5 are Knight-class giants, and in modern warfare, the number and class of giants are key factors for victory, because the difference between warrior class and knight class is like that of a child and an adult. It takes 10 warrior class giants to match just 1 knight class giant in battle, and if they are outnumbered and their giants are of a lower class, no number of regular knights will make up for all that disadvantage. In other words, if the enemy were somehow unable to use their giants, that would mean they might have a chance. The mage says that's true, but he wants to know how they could make all those giants useless. And Samian says they just need to create a situation where they can't use them. As he knows, Lacan's territory has major terrain differences on all sides, and to the east and west there are cliffs, making it difficult for a large number of people to pass through. And that leaves only one option for the enemy to move through, which would specifically be the Southern Sea. They'll probably transport most of their giants by ship across the water, so they'll set traps in that area. They'll establish barriers along the coast to prevent their giants from landing, bombarding their defenseless troops from a distance. Of course, they can't ignore the possibility of an attack from other directions, but that's something they can plan together. Naturally, they're at a numerical disadvantage, but that doesn't mean they should be afraid, because they have the Knights of Lacan led by Rogers. They also must not forget the renowned commander of the Kingdom of Volga. Each one of them individually is in no way inferior to the monarch's domains, and as long as they stay together, they will win no matter what happens. With that, everyone gets motivated because it looks like the plan is going to work, right? Next, Victor says they've already witnessed a lot of miracles up to now, and this war certainly won't be any different. Then Philip says this isn't the time to stand around and that he'll prepare for battle immediately. And then everyone starts to split up. At that very moment, the protagonist closes the door and sits down in the armchair. Man, the kid didn't seem to be doing very well. He thinks he shouldn't have used more mana than he could control, and because of that, his mana flow became far too unstable. And if this continues, nothing good is going to come of it. Right, a short while later, the scene shifts to another place, and the protagonist, inside the mine, was making a magic circle, saying that he could perform the ritual there without anyone finding out. After being reincarnated as a descendant of the Lacan family, the mana circle that had been fragile and unstable due to the family curse absorbed dark energy and transformed into a black circle. Thanks to that, he managed to surpass the limits of his body, raising it to a level 6 magic circle. But during the battle against the Scorpion Cavalry, he recklessly used an enormous amount of mana, nearly reaching the limit of his circle. As a result, the black circle that had only just been restored was put under strain, and now, unbelievably, it is on the verge of breaking once again. That's why, to solve this problem, he needs a being with magical power capable of replenishing mana, like Horate. In other words, he specifically needs a demon. Since ancient times, black mages have summoned demons to gain power, and they offer their souls only to form a kind of contract. But his goal is to replenish his magical power, and instead of borrowing the power of demons, he will absorb the demon itself, stealing all of its power and dark energy. Of course, without using magic, taming a high-class demon could be difficult, so he decided to summon a low-class one first, right? Now the only thing left is to find a sacrifice, and normally a beast or a human would be used for that. However, there is something even more suitable, which is a mage's blood, which contains a sufficient level of spiritual energy. In any case, he does not want to sacrifice innocent lives for his own goal. From the perspective of the Demon King who sought to exterminate humanity, that might seem ridiculous. And now that he thinks about it, there were some people who followed those ideals as well. The cult of darkness that worshipped the Demon King Saman also felt deep disillusionment with humanity, but at the same time, they never forgot respect and duty toward life. After reincarnation, he never heard about them again. He imagines they disappeared as well when he had been defeated. In any case, since his condition is getting worse, he needs to hurry, right? He begins the incantation, and right then, man, you can tell nothing good is coming, right? At that very moment, 3 demons appear, and Saman thinks they look impressive, but they are only low-ranking demons, and he would certainly be able to deal with them even without possessing magic. But at that very moment, the cave begins to tremble, and it seems there are more than 3 demons. At that very moment, the big beast appears, and with a roar, it says its name is Sebastian, and that it is the master of the demon realm's endless suffering, asking if he is prepared to pay the price for having summoned it. Saman didn't understand a damn thing, thinking he was sure he had used the summoning circle for low-ranking demons. In his current condition, fighting a demon like that is impossible, but he also cannot let them escape from there, because if they got into the territory they would cause complete chaos. So there is no other choice but to erase the summoning circle and send them back by force. The beast in turn asks if he is afraid after seeing all this, telling him not to worry, because if he offers his soul, it will give him a painless end. However, Saemon says he was never afraid for even a moment, and was only thinking about how he was going to destroy them. At that very moment, one of the demons tries to attack our boy, but he dodges. The battle continues that Medusa tries to attack him, but he manages to block the blow. And since life isn't all sunshine and rainbows, his sword literally gets petrified. The kid had no time to catch his breath, thinking that at this rate, he can't even get close to the magic circle, much less escape, wondering what he can do. However, at that very moment, he gets an idea, remembering that up above on the surface, there was a river. Without wasting time, he starts climbing the crystals, and at that same moment, the demon tries to attack him. At the same time, the explosion happens. And right then, my friend, a huge amount of water starts pouring down from above the cave. Our boy stayed on top of the crystals, thinking that even using a spell is putting too much strain on his body. However, now that they can't move, he can erase the magic circle, right? But unfortunately, the high-ranking demon still had not been defeated, telling him to stop fooling around and surrender already. At that very moment, the boy stands before the creature using an enhancement skill. The beast didn't understand anything, asking if he still hasn't given up. And the kid says there's no reason for that, because this body has already been through countless battles. Changing the subject, he asks if it really thought he wouldn't notice. And at that very moment, he charges at the creature, which tells him to wait because it had changed its mind. If he stops right there, it'll accept him as its subordinate and ignore everything he's done so far. And if he swears loyalty, it'll even lend him its power. But Saemon doesn't seem to care about any of that, does he? And he lands an attack on that thing. A short while later, as the smoke clears, Saemon says, just as expected, that thing was low class. And man, just by looking at this creature's face, you can tell it's going to become a mascot. The kid says its true form is pretty pathetic, and the monster asks how he found out who it really was. Saemon says its disguise was good, but it was strange how a high-class demon couldn't dodge a simple jet of water. So he decided to take a gamble, right? He knows very well because he's fought your kind many times before. And the monster, furious, says that even in this form it can still finish him off. Hearing that, our boy tells it to go ahead and try if it can. At that moment, the monster is shocked, asking how a mere human has the aura of a demon king. He replies that it's because he had simply absorbed one. Changing the subject, he asks if it knows the demon king called Saemon. Hearing that, it immediately remembers who he is, wondering if he was the one standing there. And as the protagonist lets the creature go, he says that either way, he didn't expect to be recognized. After all, it's going to die there, no matter what, right? And right then, the monster grabs the protagonist's leg, begging for mercy. It says it will devote its soul if he spares it, and that it was once known as the greatest phantom thief in the demon realm. Besides that, it's good at medicine and even has excellent alchemy skills, which means it'll definitely be useful. Hearing that, the boy approaches the cat whispering something, and with the monster saying that was totally possible, the boy immediately lets it go. And raising his hand, he says he accepts it as his familiar. Sebastian, in turn, gives his thanks, saying that he will serve him with all his heart. And at that very instant, an explosion happens, and Saemon says a cat should wear a collar that suits it, stating that if it tries to betray him, that thing will automatically kill it, so it has to behave, right? Well, my friend, the poor guy's plan went down the drain because he thought he'd be able to escape later, right? A few minutes later, the cat asks what he was doing now, and he replies that since the contract is done, he needs to get back to what he was doing. And looking at those other demons, he tells them to stay back if they don't want to get caught in it. He throws those claws toward the demons. And man, I'm gonna be honest, I can't even say what was happening there. And Sebastian, watching that from afar, wonders if he's really gonna be okay afterward. The scene then shifts elsewhere, with the protagonist destroying a tree, thinking that now he can use up to 6 circle magic without much difficulty. After absorbing that demon, he summoned and absorbed others repeatedly over the last few days, and thanks to that, the black circle is recovering quite well. Even so, he completely ruined his clothes, and if anyone sees him like this, it'll definitely cause trouble. And at that very moment, as usual, Phillips appears, saying he had been looking for him everywhere. Changing the subject, he asks what happened to his clothes and says it can't be that he got hurt. But the boy tells him not to worry and asks what happened. He replies that a message arrived saying the Monarch Count's army was approaching the territory. They're coming from the direction of the southern sea and the northern forest, which basically means from 2 sides at once. And a short while later, the scene shifts to that very place. The soldiers kept moving, heading straight toward the MC's Viscount. Looking through a spyglass, a soldier says it doesn't suit the Count to mobilize an entire army just to wipe out a mere Viscounty. And the eye patch guy says that even if a tiger gave its all to hunt a single rabbit, those guys escaped by luck countless times, and that's why he needs to completely crush their will to resist. Either way, it's better not to underestimate them, since some of them are stronger than expected. Hearing that, the guy with the little hairstyle thinks the man is acting tough after losing in the arena, wondering why the Count gave another chance to that idiot. But anyway, the Visconti did use its brain a little. They had formed a barrier up front, and the soldiers were prepared to counterattack, looking of tailoring was possibly pingazels. Right, I get it, and heads on. Off, which, without wasting time, they do just that. And the guy with the little hairstyle says they really are trying hard. But of course, those attacks wouldn't be enough, and starting to pilot his giant, he easily deflects all the projectiles. The soldiers are shocked, realizing that was a rune knight. And the guy with a smile says that no matter how hard they try, it will all be in vain. Rune knights are specifically those who can freely manipulate staffs and swords. This is the first time they had seen a monster like that, and there was a time when they were considered failures. But with the development of giant technology, that had changed. When linked to mana stones inside the giants, their power is amplified, and they become monsters capable of using magic as powerful as that of the tower's other mages. Meanwhile, the guy was acting all smug, saying they had worked very hard to stop the ship carrying the giants. But that's useless against him. And raising his staff, he launches an ice attack right from inside the ship. And without wasting any time, he immediately casts another spell, throwing a bunch of rocks toward the defenses of the protagonist Viscounty. The guy was acting like he was hot stuff, saying that now the obstacles in his path had definitely been removed, and now they could enter with the giants. And beginning the invasion of the Viscounty, he orders them to wipe them all out. The giants keep advancing, and the mage says it looks like finishing this fight will be easier than expected. It would be fun if they resisted a little longer, and the eye patch guy watching the situation thinks that there is definitely something strange going on. So many giants are approaching the castle, and even so, they haven't sent a single person, which makes him wonder what they could be planning. Meanwhile, Hans was on top of the walls making the soldiers fire cannons at the giants. Of course, that wouldn't have any effect. But then, my friend, there was something extra inside that ammunition. The giants get soaked with that liquid, wondering what that was. And unbelievably, that stuff made the giants simply stop moving. With that, this was the protagonist group's chance, and they begin launching a series of attacks. And the scene then shifts elsewhere, with Sebastian saying it's a complete mess over there. He wanted to know why the protagonist had rushed him so much. So this was probably why. A few days earlier, the kid had made a strange request, which was basically to make a glue that wouldn't come off no matter what. Of course, something like that is impossible, and in all his hundreds of years, he had never seen anything so ridiculous. But unbelievably, that thing exists. The kid simply wouldn't leave the poor man alone. Anyway, since he did all the work, the result was obvious. In just a few seconds, the tide of the battlefield had changed, and one of the blacksmiths, seeing that from afar, says he had never heard of anything like that, asking if that was some secret technique passed down in his family. But that wasn't enough, because there are still many giants left, especially those two there in the center, who are definitely new knight-class giants from the Monarch army. Going back to the pretty boy, he says they're resisting more than expected. But even so, it's still not enough, and summoning yet another spell. He launches it toward the castle gate, but at that very instant, Phillips appears in that giant, blocking the attack. The mage is obviously surprised, saying that someone strong has appeared, but of course he'll lose too, right? He makes his move, and Phillips once again manages to block it, but he seemed to be having some kind of difficulty, thinking that his speed is equal to his enemies. On the other side, the eye patch guy says he finally showed up, and he had definitely been waiting for this day. The boy is surprised, saying he thought he had been fired, but unbelievably, he was still working. And then the guy says he was given a golden opportunity on the condition that he destroy him. And this time, he's really going to defeat him. Hearing that, Philip says it's a shame he revealed his identity, asking if he had told them everything and whether the people of his kingdom specialize in lying. But now there's no time for talk, starting the duel right away. The mage keeps watching that battle from the side, saying that he'll have to make do with the one in front of him. A giant was watching the mage while holding its sword, and the pretty boy says he knew the Lacan family was poor, but facing such outdated junk is disappointing. The one piloting the giant was Victor, who says not to underestimate him, and as the last captain of the Knights of the Kingdom of Volga, he will fight against him with his life on the line. Hearing that, the mage is surprised, and then he starts laughing, saying he never thought he would hear that family's name again. Even so, Captain Victor is as rigid as ever. Hearing that, the old man is surprised and asks how he knows him, and the mage asks if he doesn't recognize his voice. Anyway, his name is Cain, and he is the rejected one of the Knights of Volga. A short time later, the scene shifts to the north of Lacan territory, and the protagonist, looking at everything from above, realizes that the battle had already begun. Thinking that it was a good idea to dispatch the forces in advance, the Count expanded his power through countless territorial wars, and he is not someone to be underestimated. Luckily, most of the giants were sent south, leaving only ordinary soldiers in the north, and that's why stationing troops there was the right decision. Of course, with so few troops, even placing them all in a single area was an effort, and sending soldiers into the forest should have been even harder, but all of that was solved in a different way. And meanwhile, the battle keeps going. The bandana guy says this is his only chance to repay the young master who had helped them. Apparently, those people there were the villagers from before, and Simon thinks he's glad the training of those bandits paid off. Since they're used to real combat, they're proving unbelievably to be useful. But then, my friend, since life isn't easy, at that very moment, 4 soldiers surround one of the bandits. Then, another person appears and unbelievably manages to dodge every single attack, counter-attacking one of the soldiers. The guy really wasn't messing around. And that was Rogers, who tells him to be careful not to push too far past the enemy lines. The boy watching the situation realizes that things are going well. However, if this drags on, it will definitely end badly. So there's no choice but to hurry, and at that very moment, the protagonist lets out a whistle that echoes across the entire battlefield. No one understood what was going on, and Rogers, looking up, realizes it was the protagonist's signal, which means that, most likely, all the preparations are already complete, ordering the entire army to begin retreating. The soldiers are surprised by this, and of course they start following them, right? And a little later, deeper into the forest, Saemon's soldiers were completely surrounded. The soldier there, all smug, says that this will be their grave. Meanwhile, Saemon's soldiers remain silent. Rogers says it seems like he's misunderstanding something, stating that their objective has already been accomplished. After all, the ones cornered there aren't them. Right then, one of the soldiers grabs a torch and lights something. Man, up above there were a whole bunch of barrels. At that very moment, a huge explosion happens and the projectiles completely block off the soldiers' path. With that, the protagonist's soldiers are trapped inside, and the soldier says that all of this is a useless effort. Then Rogers says that the people of Lacan rarely set foot in this mountain range and are strictly warned from childhood not to go there, wondering if he at least knows the reason why, which is simply because it's a monster nest. And in all this time, of everyone who entered that place, not a single person had ever returned alive. Meanwhile, Saemon was watching everything from above, thinking that things were proceeding according to plan. Now he needs to finish things in the south, and at this rate, it might end even more easily than expected. At that very moment, looking ahead, he notices smoke, realizing that it's coming from the west, and then he already has a pretty good idea of what was happening, assuming there is another part of the army. He keeps advancing through the forest, taking out a few soldiers as he comes across them. At that very moment, another explosion happens, and the protagonist, moving, thinks he didn't expect them to send troops from another direction, and definitely underestimated the count. This is taking longer than he thought, and he'll definitely be late getting to the south. Either way, all he can do is hope that everyone manages to hold out. The scene then shifts to Victor, who apparently was having some kind of trouble with that mage. The guy says they held out longer than expected, but either way, this is already the end. After all, they can't fight on equal footing with a piece of junk like that. If he had stayed quiet in the monarch's territory, none of this would have happened, and he's still as hard to understand as ever. Right after that, Victor says that he swore loyalty to the kingdom of Volga, but now he's just the count's pawn, asking if he has no shame as a knight and saying he's still an opportunist, as always. Soon after, the boy says that the monarch count knows how to truly recognize his abilities, and thanks to him, he's enjoying a new life. Hearing that, Victor asks if he's been holding onto resentment all this time, but the boy didn't want to hear any more chatter. Summoning one more of his abilities, he was about to attack the old man. Then a flashback appears from 15 years ago, with the same young man saying that he performed better in the combat evaluation, asking why that guy was promoted, and saying there's definitely something wrong. And at that very moment, Victor appears asking what was going on. The little boy says there must have been some mistake in the promotion results. And Victor asks if he used magic during that test. Using anything other than sword skill in a duel is grounds for disqualification. Even so, the boy pushes back, asking whether he shouldn't be valued more for doing something no one else can do. And Victor mentions that the test was made to evaluate only sword skills, and thinks no further explanation is necessary. After that, the young man asks if he's trying to stop him from being promoted. Since he can't use magic, he probably feels threatened by his talent, asking if it isn't just jealousy. But the old man, hearing all that, simply turns away and leaves. Returning to the present, Victor was still holding on, and the boy, surprised, says the result will still be the same. This is the power he once looked down on, asking if he finally realizes his true ability. In any case, he will die by the power he once ignored. And then Victor says that he hasn't changed at all since the beginning. I don't know how, but the guy suddenly starts dodging every single attack, charging straight at the kid. Of course, the mage wasn't just gonna stand there waiting, and summons that ice ability again, managing to pierce the giant. But the old man still hadn't given up, saying it seems he hasn't trained his swordsmanship since then, asking if he didn't make it clear to him before, because in a battle between knights, calculating your opponent's distance is extremely important. And now he's inside your range, kid. He literally slashed the guy with his blade. Next, Victor says that the truth is he had already recognized his ability. Few have the qualities to become a unique knight, but he was strict because relying only on magic wouldn't get him far. He could have become a good prominent knight, and unfortunately that's a real shame. Honestly, I wanted to go help Phillips right now, but in this condition there's no way he'll be able to go, right? And now there's no other way, right? Everything is in the boy's hands, who meanwhile kept fighting that golden knight. The situation wasn't looking very favorable for the protagonist group, and at that very moment, an explosion happens. Phillips is thrown against the wall, and the golden knight asks where the ability is that he showed in the giant arena, even thinking he had overestimated him. Phillips says he's awfully full of himself, even after being defeated twice, and observing the situation, the boy thinks that it's as if that guy had become a completely different person in a short time. Wondering what he should do now, right? Going inside that guy's cabin, he thinks that, as expected, this thing is impressive. Apparently he was using some kind of stone that the count had given him, and using a few more of them again. Man, the dude starts glowing all over. Phillips realizes he had become more powerful, and the guy, all smug, says there's no point trying to stall him. He's going to end all this with a single blow, and raising his axe he was about to strike. But Phillips immediately starts running away, thinking that his power is enormous, but his mobility is low, which means he has the advantage in terms of speed. But since life isn't easy, the guy literally managed to catch up at that very moment. Phillips still couldn't believe all the abilities that guy had gained. But even so, he has to keep fighting, right? Since there's no time to think. The two keep exchanging blows and Phillips manages to find an opening. But it only lasted a short time. And the guy in the armor manages to grab the leg of Phillips's giant. After throwing him at the same time, an explosion happens. And Phillips didn't seem to have a way out. The difference in power is glaring, and he thought he at least had the advantage in speed, but even that was completely matched, assuming that it really won't be enough to defend his territory. At that very moment, a flashback appears with Roger saying that the Phantom Sword ability has a fatal flaw. Attacking during high-speed movement means your trajectory becomes predictable, making it easier to detect. If he doesn't fix that, others besides him will notice his ability. And Phillips says that changing direction in the middle of the ability will make it even slower. However, the knight warns him that he doesn't need to worry too much about that, and that this method alone should already be enough to solve that problem of his. Next, the eye patch guy says that he's very tough, but that's going to end right now, once and for all. Phillips continues without moving a single muscle, and at that same moment manages to dodge the attack, and with a leap, starts circling the guy, apparently becoming much faster. Seeing what was happening, the eye patch guy says that his main armor won't hold up much longer like this. Either way, you can struggle as much as you want. After all, I can read all your movements. He tries to grab Phillips, but this time, the boy was faster. The guy is surprised that he couldn't keep up with him, and taking advantage of the opportunity, Phillips finally manages to land an attack, mentioning that his uncle once told him that against most opponents, just a slight change in trajectory would make the Phantom Sword ability almost impossible to react to. Good thing the guy isn't very skilled, but the eye patch dude says he still hadn't given up. As long as he recharged his mana stone, he was nothing. However, at that very moment, another giant appears, impaling the guy in the golden armor, asking how many mana stones he planned to waste on that idiot. He definitely shouldn't have given him another chance, throwing the poor guy far away, mentioning that from now on he will face him on his own. Man, and would you look at that, it was the Count. Those idiots couldn't take over a second-rate territory like this, and were even forcing him to step in personally. These people are definitely nothing but a bunch of useless fools, and after the guy in the golden armor falls to the ground at that very moment, a huge explosion happens. Phillips watches all that in surprise. After all, the guy just killed his own men. He stands before that monstrosity, saying that no matter who he's facing, his duty remains the same, and he definitely won't get past here. Hearing that, the Count says he's probably bluffing, wanting to know if he thinks he can stop him in that state. But he won't know unless he tries, right? And without wasting time, charges at the Count. The guy, unbelievably enough, doesn't even dodge the blows, and since life isn't all sunshine and roses, nothing had any effect. The boy looks at that in surprise, and the Count with just one hand tries to land a blow on Phillips. He manages to dodge, but of course it was by a hair, right? And the guy, continuing his string of attacks, finally lands a hit. Apparently just one attack like that already caused enormous damage. And right then, my guy, the whole giant shatters to pieces. Phillips also seemed to have been injured and soon after ends up defeated. Hans was watching that situation from afar and with no other choice tells them to prepare the artillery. But there wasn't even time for that, and at that very moment, the Count begins to pierce through a wall. The whole place was shaking and little by little the wall breaks apart, finally being completely destroyed. A short time later, Hans was in the middle of that rubble, saying that even so, they still couldn't let that thing through. Unfortunately, most of the soldiers had already been defeated, and at that very moment the Count, looking down, realizes that a giant was holding him. It was Victor, who wasn't going to let him take even one more step. Count Monarch asks what he thinks he can do with a broken machine, and stop him once and for all. Right, one after another they keep getting on his nerves, mentioning that this situation is pathetic. And even after that giant had been completely broken, Victor was still holding on to his leg. Right then, the guy was already losing his patience, and with a kick he literally sends the poor guy flying away. He even ends up coming out of the giant, and the dude didn't seem to be doing too well. The Count, now furious, goes after him, saying that he was just going to leave, but now he's changed his mind. He's going to end all of this here and now, stating that he'll send the princess along with him soon. The situation really didn't look good, and at that very moment, the protagonist appears to save the day, saying that he was invading his land as if it were his own, destroying absolutely everything. And because of that, he hoped he was ready to face the consequences. Observing the situation, the Count thinks that he had never heard of someone capable of controlling so many golems, stating that now he understands everything. He is probably the young master of Lacan, asking if this is the power he used to defeat the Scorpion cavalry. This power resembles the Demon King's magic, and it's impossible that the heir of the noble bloodline has immersed himself in this. If this becomes public, House Lacan will surely be erased from history. However, the protagonist says that won't happen because he has no intention of letting him leave there alive. Right then, the Count gets pissed hearing that, asking if he thinks a pathetic golem like that could face his giant. And at that very moment, Saman uses those claw abilities again, completely restraining the giant, thinking that he would like to finish him off right now. But unfortunately, he's almost out of mana and can only hold him for a short time. Somehow, he'll have to settle everything using only the golems. And at that same moment, all the golems fire a laser beam. An explosion happens, and the giant, still standing, says that this is pathetic, asking if he was bragging so much just to do that. However, Samon says it wasn't over yet. And right then, the golems end up surrounding him. Of course, the Count thinks that wouldn't work, but there was something different about those golems. And at that very moment, an explosion happens inside there. Simon was watching all of that from afar, thinking that it was good. He had put a fourth circle explosion spell in the golem just in case. It'll take some time to make another one. And looking ahead, he realizes that the guy was still completely intact, saying that if the goal was to annoy him, he definitely succeeded. He shouldn't expect to die so easily. And the protagonist, surprised, wonders what that giant is made of. Resisting that kind of explosion is incredible. But after looking underneath the giant, he more or less realizes what was happening, saying that he doesn't seem calm enough to talk so much. And drawing his sword, he asks if he forgot that he is a descendant of the hero's bloodline. Seeing all that, the guy starts laughing, asking if he's trying to face a giant with his bare hands. But the kid was taking this very seriously, and charging at the giant, he says he'll only know if he tries. Thus, the giant tries to make his attack, but Simon manages to dodge, thinking that it seems the explosion had slowed him down a lot, and that this way he'll be able to find a way to win. Right? He manages to land his attack, but unfortunately that armor is very tough. The giant says that this is a pointless fight, and at that very moment launches his attack. Our boy manages to defend himself, however, he is thrown upward. With no time to breathe, the giant keeps attacking, and man, life wasn't easy for our boy. He manages to dodge the blows, thinking that he just has to hold on a little longer. His energy was almost exhausted, and looking farther ahead, he realizes that the giant seemed to be damaged. The count says that he was running away like a rat as always, and losing his patience summons his maximum power. The guy wasn't messing around, making a bunch of attacks on the ground. However, at that same moment, he is surprised after all. The kid had simply disappeared. And Samon, all smug, says that he hates to admit it, but this swordsmanship even defeated elite Gonins with 9th circle mana. It's a ridiculously powerful skill. Apparently the giant wasn't able to move anymore, and Simon, taking advantage of the situation, charges at the guy. Right then, he manages to move his arm, thinking that he managed to hit the protagonist. But the kid managed to dodge, and using the hero's aura, he lands an attack. Meanwhile, the count didn't seem to believe it. After all, he had been defeated by a brat like this. The giant's system wasn't working, and the guy says this wasn't how it was supposed to end. And with no other choice, he had to climb down from that monstrosity. Right? Starting to run away, he says he won't let things end like this. And seeing the situation, the protagonist thinks he has to find a way to catch him. But unfortunately, he had completely run out of energy and couldn't move. He had almost caught him, and now he's letting him get away. And if that happens, that guy will become an even greater threat. However, at that very moment, Rogers appears, apologizing for the delay. Simon says they should capture the monarch, but the man says not to worry. At that very moment, the monarch, I don't know how, ends up tripping, and someone asks where he was going in such a hurry. The ones there were the rest of the villagers, who ask if he missed them. The guy says scum like them can't do this. And then Reina appears, saying that these are the people who weren't even treated as human in their own land and lived under the constant threat of death. They had never even properly met before, and right after that, the count says he did all of this to win her over, asking forgiveness for having gone too far. But she says she isn't the only one who should be asking for forgiveness. Besides, doing this is the height of shamelessness. The young man keeps begging for mercy, but it was already too late to regret it. Right, my friend? Meanwhile, Simon was watching everything from afar, saying it was a fitting end for an idiot like him. Changing the subject, he asks if everyone else was evacuated safely, and Rogers says they definitely won the war. Even the invasion routes they were worried about were secured with minimal damage thanks to the efforts of the Knights of Volga. Simon asks what happened to Phillips and Victor, and the guy says their giants were severely damaged, but fortunately they're alive. While he was holding back Count Monarch, he managed to evacuate them to a safe place. And even the mercenaries are rescuing the soldiers on the wall. For that reason, he shouldn't worry about anything else and needs to go rest. However, Samon says he can't do that, while the soldiers who followed him are still out there. Hearing that, Rogers reflects that not only did he save the life of a hopeless nation, but he's also thinking of others even when he can barely stand. Which means that he definitely must be the reincarnation of Lord Lacan. My friend, little does he know that this is the Demon Lord. The scene then shifts to the imperial capital, Nemesis, and a king, looking at a man, is surprised that Count Monarch lost. The guy says it's truly regrettable, mentioning that none of the houses showed any kind of movement. And the king, surprised, asks if a family without any outside help and even in ruins defeated an army dozens of times larger than its own, and whether he really expected him to believe that. Observing the situation, the man thinks the king has always had a chilling presence, saying that, according to the report before the war happened, refugees from the former Kingdom of Volga were relocated to the Viscounty of Lacan, which means elite knights of the Kingdom of Volga were probably among them. However, there's another shocking rumor spreading, because the one who defeated Count Monarch in that territory was none other than the young lord of that land. Hearing that, the king is surprised and asks if that idiot wasn't almost dying in bed not long ago. However, the guy says that according to his infiltrated informant, he is not only proficient with swords, but also skilled in magic. He even fought Count Monarch and a giant while completely alone. And judging by the situation, the rumors about his illness were probably fabricated to hide the Viscounty's power. Observing the situation, the king is surprised, wondering whether the curse of the Lacan family is really still in effect. Even supposing that bastard had betrayed him, Even if the curse was deactivated, fighting a giant unarmed is irrational, saying he thought the fame of the Lacan family's swordsmanship was just an exaggerated legend from 500 years ago. Then the man says that at this rate, it's only a matter of time before that territory grows powerful. If Lacan is hiding its power, it must be preparing to oppose the throne, and they no doubt intend to reclaim their former glory. Who would have thought they were building power by recruiting former knights of Volga, asking if there's no way to stop the rise of the Lacan family, and then the guy suggests recruiting him instead. The king asks if he means putting him in the armed forces, and the young man says that's exactly it. According to imperial law, all men upon turning 18 are required to serve 2 years in the imperial army. Hearing that, the king says it's a good idea. After all, that way the lord wouldn't dare act recklessly. With that, everything was settled, and the king says that, as expected, the guy sees what he really wants, asking for a royal decree to be sent to the Viscounty of Lacan, along with congratulations on the victory in the territorial war. Then the scene returns to Lacan territory, with Phillips apologizing for the delay because he just finished the task the young master gave him, asking if the meeting has already started, and looking at the group, they didn't seem to be doing very well. Phillips asks whether they shouldn't be throwing a party for having won the battle, and a few minutes after Rogers explained the situation to the boy, he was just like everyone else. At that very moment, the protagonist shows up asking why everyone is so sad, wanting to know if someone died or something like that. Then Phillips asks what they're supposed to do. After all, Lamer's territory is far too large for them to handle. They're already struggling to deal with the refugees from Volga, and now they'll have to deal with 10 times more people. At this rate, nothing good is going to happen, and our hero tells them not to worry, since he already has something in mind. And a short while later, in the public square of Lamer territory, the protagonist was standing in the middle of it, apparently giving a speech saying that they must already know that Lamer territory has been annexed to the Viscounty of Lacan, which means that from now on, whatever decisions he makes as lord, they must follow. Everyone starts arguing, saying they thought the House of Heroes would treat them better. And right away, the protagonist tells them to be quiet because he is now going to announce the new policies regarding Lamer territory. And to sum it up, he wants to turn Lamer into a free city. Everyone is surprised, wanting to know what that means, and someone says it means there will no longer be trade restrictions with any city in the empire. Lamer, centered around its port, has the potential to become a major transportation hub. But until now, trade was restricted to Count Monarch's domain, and even if people wanted to expand, the costs were too high, and that environment prevented the city's development. And that is exactly why he intends to return that opportunity to them, the rightful owners of this land, also that, with their own hands, they can turn Lamer into the empire's greatest commercial center. Hearing that, everyone is shocked, and one of the men says that sounds good, but it just means they'll work more while he takes everything through taxes. Hearing that, our boy asks if he knows what percentage of taxes he used to pay, and the guy says it was around 40%, and raising his hand, the kid casually says he's going to charge them 4%, asking if that would be enough. Right then, of course, everyone is stunned, and Samon thinks that if management is difficult, all he needs to do is inspire motivation and let them grow on their own. Right? Lamer has tremendous potential, and once it prospers, even with a small tax rate, even 5% would amount to an absurd sum. With that, everyone starts to trust the protagonist, becoming happy with the new leadership, and he thinks that up to now the administrative costs have been almost zero, which means it's pure profit, and the kid loves that, right? With that, some time passes, and Reina says it's a bold decision for him to basically create a free city. Simon says he wants to believe in the potential of Lamer's people, and there are still many problems to solve. The girl says he always makes surprising choices, and then Simon, looking around, asks what this place was, and the girl with a smile says she liked that place very much. When she lived in Lamer, she always came there whenever her mind felt heavy, just like the Demon King's castle is for him. Looking at this scenery brings her peace, and honestly, she isn't sure why. And turning back to our boy, she thanks him for saving the people of Volga, and everyone from the Viscounty who fought in her place, and because of that, she truly wanted to thank him. Hearing that, Simon simply says he only did what had to be done, and besides, the people of Volga only held out because she remained strong. Then Reina says Simon is a remarkable person, mentioning that the rumors claiming he was a frail person struck by illness were a complete lie. After all, the real Lord Simon she came to know is firmer and stronger than anyone she has ever known. Someone who never turns away from those who need help without asking for anything in return. And it's no wonder everyone called him the reincarnation of the hero Lacan. Hearing that, Simon says they only say that because they don't know he used dark magic, because if they knew the truth, it would be a different story. However, the girl says that doesn't matter because there is absolutely no way they would follow the same path as the Demon King. With that, our boy becomes uneasy, saying that when he entered the Demon King's castle, he managed to find his diary. Basically, it was the record of his life, and that guy had been a mage from the Ivory Tie's magic tower, more diligent and kind than anyone else, whose life was changed by the death of his beloved. Thus, he sought forbidden magic and gained power beyond human understanding. Basically, a man who ended up fighting alone against all the nations of the continent. After saying all that, Simon thinks he can't reveal anything more. In any case, he always thought that she was that man's wife, and maybe she would understand, even if only a little. The two remain there in silence, and Simon says it's hard to believe that story, and honestly, he understands that. So Reina asks whether the others know about it, and the kid says no, because it would be hard for them to accept. Of course, he's not saying all of that man's choices were right, but that guy also had a side the world never saw. At that moment, Saemin falls silent again, saying he had said too much and asking her to forget what he said. The girl simply says she understands, and Saemin says she doesn't need to agree with what he said, and that he would understand if she didn't believe it. Reina says that she doesn't believe in his diary, but in the protagonist. And whatever he believes in, including the Demon King, she will believe in as well. A little while later, it was already afternoon, and a nervous guard says he thought he would finally be able to go home now that the war was over. Most of the workforce was sent to repair the walls, so there's not much to do, right? At that very moment, the two hear a noise, realizing that there was something in the bushes. At the same time, one of the soldiers suddenly collapses to the ground, and after someone appears behind the poor guy, he gets knocked out too. The guy who had done that was watching the situation, asking if this was the place where Princess Reina was. A few minutes later, a bunch of servants from the Lucan family were lying on the floor, and after those two open a door, pulling the blanket off the bed, they realized there was no one there. The man is surprised, and at that very moment, Saemin says he doesn't remember inviting anyone. The kid, completely calm, was sitting on the windowsill saying that the scent of sleeping incense was hanging throughout the mansion, and that without an antidote he would have passed out too. Anyway, he wants to know what dark elves who normally hide in the forest are doing there. Without wasting any time, the two immediately start to flee, and Saemin tells them not to even try that, using that claw ability again. Immediately, the elf realizes that it was dark magic, and with no other choice, they draw their weapons. Saemin is surprised, saying it's been a long time since someone managed to block his attack, and it seems they're actually pretty strong. One of the elves charges at him, and the young man says they unfortunately chose the wrong enemy, because when it comes to dark elves, he had already fought more than enough of them. Out of nowhere, a wolf-shaped golem appears and grabs one of the dark elves, and man, that little creature is definitely not normal. Saemin tells them not to underestimate it, because that battle golem is imbued with high-quality magic stones. Anyway, he wants to know who sent them there. There's no way the proud elven race would ally itself with the Emperor. One of the elves says that maybe they could be the opposition faction. And at that very moment, they throw some kind of flash bomb. With that, they take the opportunity to escape, and Saemin says he only let them go because he didn't sense any killing intent. And anyway, since he's the target, they'll come back eventually. This is the first time he's seen an elf, and he used to see them often back then, wondering if that guy could still be alive. The scene then shifts to another place, and someone calls this glasses-wearing guy Lord Aranesses. Then another elf appears, saying the wind is cold and asking to go inside already. However, Aaron says it's fine, and that he has no choice because that is the best place to observe the stars. Changing the subject, he says he has something to tell her, and handing her a box, he asks her to open it. At that very moment, the girl is surprised, realizing that it was a magic staff, and the old man mentions that this is the so-called absolute divine staff. They say the supreme god used it to defeat the demon god and create the world, so it is basically a legendary artifact. Erwin says she thought it was something from a fairy tale and never imagined something like that really existed. Erene says that, as she knows, it is as powerful as the branches of the world tree, and if misused, the danger is beyond imagination, which is why he kept it hidden until now. And for that reason, she needs to take that thing and go south. A star lost long ago has reappeared, and this continent will soon be thrown into chaos once again. However, because of the war, the elves were cut off from the spirit realm and can no longer summon the spirits they had bonded with. At this rate, they will not survive the chaos to come, and that is why they need the power of the world tree. And if they can obtain the key of dimensions, which is the tear of the earth, they can reopen the sealed passage between the worlds. Luckily, they realized its power had been sensed in the south, and hearing that, Erwin asks why he chose her out of everyone, and the old man says that is already obvious. After all, she is his most trusted successor. She says she made it very clear that she had no intention of becoming a mage, but he says that's pointless, since he had already chosen her. And there's no other way either, since the fate of their species is at stake, right? And accepting the mission, she states that she will return and find what he wants, no matter what happens. The girl finally leaves, and Aaron keeps staring ahead. Right then, my friend, nothing good is coming. And Aranis says it's surprising that the guy had been waiting so calmly, saying it would be a good idea for him to leave now. The hooded man is surprised, saying that, as expected of him, no one had ever seen through his camouflage before. Anyway, he was only watching because the conversation was interesting, asking if even though he can't use spirit magic, he still plans to face him. Then Irene says that he of all people, after 500 years, had completely forgotten how pathetically he lost. Anyway, he wants to know how he returned there without fear. And with the battle about to begin, the guy says he came to take back what was stolen from him, asking where this so-called Atlas project is. The two just stand there staring each other down, and Aaron's asks why he's looking for that in a place like this. The young man asks him not to play dumb, asking if he really thinks he doesn't know that someone called Dark Moon is preparing for war with the Empire and creating a bunch of giants. Clearly, Aaron is trying to build a new hero-class giant using stolen designs and Veritas technology. However, the old man says he's talking nonsense and that he left the front lines a long time ago. With that, the guy says that if this keeps up, he won't have any other choice, and he'll have to use a more brute force method. Aranis manages to defend against that barrage of attacks, and the guy says his defense is excellent, as expected. But unfortunately, it won't last much longer, and it's already starting to crack. However, the old man wasn't going to give up that easily, and starts casting an enchantment at that very instant. Magic begins to envelop the entire area. The hooded man is surprised, saying it's incredible that he can cast elemental magic of that level without the help of a spirit. Even so, even someone like him seems powerless before time, mentioning that he once even stood beside Samon, who was far more powerful. Then Aranis says that out of fear of death, he resorted to forbidden sorcery and was still completely full of himself, and that he certainly won't escape Lord Elksol's wrath. The guy says that the divine judgment of a god might not even be real, and wanting to put an end to that annoying conversation once and for all, he extends his hand, creating a kind of magical barrier, and Artheus does the same thing too. And right then, man, a huge bolt of lightning comes down from the sky. Surprised, the hooded man says that even after tampering with his memories, he recovered quickly, and that this old man definitely shouldn't be underestimated, huh? And Aaron says he's very arrogant, even though he's just a child, asking if he's already forgotten how he lost to him in the past. A giant monster appears at that very instant, and right then, my friend, the guy kicks the bucket. Thus, victory goes to Aranis, who wonders whether that guy had escaped. It seems that dude's name is Arson, and unlike him who had lost his strength, that guy had become even more powerful, and he doubts he can stop him alone now. In any case, the prophesied final war is finally beginning. The scene then returns to Lacan territory, and the protagonist actually looked like a proper person in those clothes now, huh? A soldier opens the door and the kid walks into a corridor. Someone immediately says that he has arrived, and our boy, without wasting any time, kneels down, saying his name is Saman of House Lacan, offering greetings to your Imperial Majesty. Apparently he was in that old man's kingdom, who says he had been waiting for him for quite a long time. Everyone stays there in that awkward silence, and the king didn't seem very pleased. Just by looking, he can tell that the boy's swordsmanship is that of a mid-level expert, and his magic is probably in the third circle. Then he says the boy has had a long journey. In any case, the reason he summoned him today is to praise his victory in the territorial war and formally grant him a title to issue his imperial military appointment. Therefore, he must accept the duties of nobility with pride, and Saman, observing the situation, thinks that it's exactly as he expected. The imperial family had clearly distanced itself from House Lacan until now, and they paid no attention while the house was collapsing. But this victory would make them even more wary. At that, the king says that his empire is at a stalemate with those wretches from the Republic, and lately their movements have become suspicious. And for that reason, he must go to Fort Tolrud and serve as the empire's right-hand man. At that very moment, Phillips is surprised by the location, asking the king to reconsider that. This is no different from sending his lord to his death, and Saman, simply accepting the offer, says he has a single condition. The king asks what it is, and Phillips, feeling uneasy, asks if he even knows what kind of place that was. Every commander stationed there lost his head within a month, and it has been without a leader for 3 years because of how infamous it is. Sending him into such a trap is as if they saw him as their mortal enemy. And right then, the king gets furious, asking what he just said about him. At that very moment, Saman thinks it's hard to believe that an old man like that has such presence, and if he had let his guard down even a little, even his own will might have been overwhelmed by it. Soon after, the king, still furious, asks if he just set a condition before the emperor, and the boy completely naturally says that is exactly right, and in order to carry out your majesty's orders, that condition must be met. Man, the kid's really putting himself on the line, huh? The two keep staring at each other, and Phillips watches the situation from the side, thinking that when an envoy from the emperor brought the recruitment notice, he was strangely calm. But this is going way too far now. At that, the king says his arrogance knows no bounds, and if he cannot give a convincing reason, he will pay the price for mocking his emperor. Saman says he is well aware of Fort Tolrud's infamous reputation and of its danger as a front line as well, and that is why the nobles avoid taking command there, and for that reason, he wanted to manage that place personally. The king didn't understand anything, asking what he meant, and Saman says that his main objective is to strengthen his military power. If he increases his influence over the banner of House Lacan's territory, he will have the means to control his men more easily, and with that, prove his worth through clear results in real combat. The king, observing the situation, says that land is merely a remote and minor fortress, asking if, even so, that will be his only condition. Saman says that for now it may be just one among many ordinary fortresses, but it is a strategic point between the Volga Republic and Nemesis, which means it can become a transportation hub as soon as the war ends. This war holds countless possibilities, and that is the other reason why he wants Fort Tolrud. Seeing all that, the king thinks he doesn't find this situation pleasant, but the boy will probably die at the fortress, so it won't make any difference, right? And accepting the offer, he says that he will grant him land together with his noble title. And Saman, giving his thanks, says that he will certainly live up to his majesty's expectations. With that, my partner, everything was already settled, and the brat is now appointed as the new commander of Fort Tolrud and is granted ownership of the territory. On top of that, he formally receives the title of Viscount Lacan. A short time later, the scene shifts elsewhere, and there were two giants fighting. One of their swords is thrown far away, and Philip says he lost, mentioning that his growth rate is truly unbelievable. The one in the other giant was the protagonist, who was feeling all smug for having won. Phillips asks if it was really his first time piloting a giant because in the past he couldn't even stand properly the first time he got on one, and he is incredibly talented to become skilled enough to defeat him in such a short time. Hearing that, Saman says it is only thanks to his instructor's excellent skills, And looking at the giant, he thinks that fortunately the structure of the giant's mana circuit is similar to that of the golem he designed. At that moment, giants are the most powerful force they possess, and that power is something that even someone skilled in magic like him realized he could barely face alone. Anyway, they are making at least a little progress, and Samuel, wasting no time, asks to go inspect the territory. The scene then shifts to a village, and the bald guy from earlier notices that the protagonist was there, asking how the progress is going. The old man says that the damage caused by Count Monarch's army has been almost completely repaired. The facilities for the people of Volga are also being built without issue, thanks to the generous supply of workers and materials. In addition, the structure of the merchant guild he mentioned is starting to take some kind of shape. Honestly, employment was the biggest concern when accepting so many refugees, but he didn't expect the issue to be resolved so easily. Observing the situation, our boy thinks that turning Lamer into a free city served this very purpose, so that they could establish their own guild. The former kingdom of Volga developed trade because of its infertile lands, and because of that its people have experience in administration and finance. And if they are given a place like Lamer, they will undoubtedly prosper without any kind of restriction. Honestly, he is eager to see the place when he returns, and the old man asks if he is going to skip the inspection of the Mage Tower. And Saman says that it is fine because he had left all the necessary matters to Lord Muti. No matter how skilled a pilot becomes, it makes no sense if he doesn't have a giant to pilot. So because of the preparations for countless future battles, he began building a new magic tower. With the book stolen from the Veritas Magic Academy together with the Atlas blueprints, he will create a new hero-class giant with that technology. He is eager to see what it will look like, and by the time he returns from his post, many things will surely have changed. Besides, now that he remembered, that tower has no name. Naming it is not absolutely necessarily, but if he had to give it a name, he already has one in mind. At that very moment, Reina notices that our boy was there, asking if he had already finished his work, because she had been waiting for him to give him something before he left. She had some kind of stone in her hand, saying that it is made from a fragment of a treasure passed down by the royal family, and it is believed to have the power to protect someone. Surprised, Saman questions why she gave him something so precious, and Reina says that she heard that his Imperial Majesty had summoned him. Because of that, she hoped he would return safely. And hearing that, the big guy gets all embarrassed. Of course, he's not going to refuse the gift, right? Saying that he will return safely and give it back to her. It will definitely be a promise, and a short time later, it was already night, and our boy was leaving. Han says there is no need to leave in secret, and Saman says that everyone is incredibly busy and they would try to hold a farewell ceremony, which means it would be troublesome. Anyway, he will count on Hans to manage the territory while he is away. The guy says he will do his best, and the protagonist says that he is no longer young, so he should not overdo it, right? At that very moment, someone calls out to Saman, and man, it was Phillips, already fully prepared for the journey, asking if he really intended to leave him behind. He had said he would become the sword that protects him, so he should always stay by your side, and that's exactly why he'll be accompanying you. Our boy just listens to everything in silence, and then soon smiles, saying that if he slows you down, you'll send him back immediately, right?